The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, hungry and merciless, tearing at the weathered boards of the stable and sending snow sideways through every gap in the wood. Marcus Cole had lived through 17 winters in Hunter Creek Valley, but none had arrived with such fury, such deliberate cruelty, as if the sky itself had decided to punish the earth below. He stood at the window of his cabin, watching the white wall advance across the pasture, swallowing fence posts and hay bales, and anything foolish enough to remain standing in its path. The horses were already restless in the stable, their frightened whinnies barely audible above the screaming wind, and Marcus knew he would have to check on them before the storm reached its peak. He pulled on his heavy coat, the one lined with wolf fur that his father had worn before him, and stepped out into the assault of ice and snow. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and stinging his eyes until tears froze on his cheeks. He had been alone in this valley for 3 years now, ever since the fever had taken Sarah and their unborn child in a single terrible week. And in all that time, he had never felt more isolated than he did in this moment, a single human form struggling against the infinite white fury of nature. The stable was only 50 yards from the cabin, but by the time he reached it, his hands were numb and his beard was crusted with ice. The hinges shrieked when he pushed open the door, the sound almost lost in the howling storm behind him. He held the lantern high, its flickering light casting dancing shadows across the straw-covered floor, and that was when he saw her. At first, his mind refused to process what his eyes were showing him. A massive body writhed in the damp straw near the back wall, shoulders as broad as two wooden planks, skin the color of burnished copper, and a back covered in wounds that could only have come from a whip. She was wearing the torn remnants of what might once have been a dress, now reduced to bloody rags that barely covered her enormous frame. When she looked up at the sound of his entrance, Marcus found himself staring into a pair of golden eyes that burned with a light he had only ever seen in the eyes of wounded mountain lions, cornered and desperate and ready to kill anything that came within reach. She was at least 7 feet tall, perhaps more. Her arms were thick with muscle, despite the obvious signs of exhaustion and abuse, and her hands were large enough to crush his skull with a single squeeze. She was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen in his life, and she was also, he realized with the shock that went through him like lightning, the most beautiful. His hand moved instinctively toward the revolver at his hip, but something stopped him before his fingers touched the grip. He saw the snapped bindings still attached to her wrists, the raw wounds where rope had cut deep into her flesh, the way she pressed herself against the wall, as if trying to disappear into the wood itself. She was not a threat. She was prey hunted and wounded, and at the absolute end of her strength. Stay back. Her voice was broken, barely more than a whisper against the howling wind outside. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, and he could see her entire body trembling, though whether from cold or fear or both he could not tell. Marcus did not move back. He also did not reach for his gun again. Instead, he lowered the lantern slightly, reducing the harsh glare that was making her squint, and took a single step to the side, putting more distance between himself and the door. He wanted her to know that he was not blocking her escape, that she could leave if she chose to, even though they both knew that leaving meant death in the storm outside. "You are on my land," he spoke slowly, clearly making sure she could understand every word. "I do not want trouble. Are you hungry?" She tilted her head, her golden eyes narrowing with suspicion. He could see her mind working behind those eyes, calculating the odds, measuring the distance between them, deciding whether he was a threat that needed to be eliminated or simply an obstacle to be avoided. No answer came from her lips, but her silence was answer enough. Marcus set the lantern down on an overturned bucket, then reached into his coat and pulled out the piece of dried beef he had been planning to eat himself. He placed it on the wooden floor along with his water flask, and then stepped back again, putting the full width of the stable between them. "If you want to eat, I will not come closer." For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind continued to scream outside, the horses continued to stamp and whinny in their stalls, and the giant woman continued to stare at him with those unreadable golden eyes. Then so slowly that Marcus almost missed the movement, she began to crawl forward. It was painful to watch. Every movement cost her, every inch of progress was a battle against her own broken body. Her wounds reopened as she moved, leaving dark smears of blood on the straw behind her. By the time she reached the food, her breathing had become so labored that Marcus was genuinely afraid she might collapse and never rise again. But she did not collapse. She picked up the dried beef with trembling hands and ate it with the desperation of someone who had not seen food in days. The water followed drunk so fast that half of it spilled down her chin and onto her chest. When she was finished, she looked up at him again, and for the first time something other than fear flickered in her golden eyes. Not gratitude exactly, but perhaps the beginning of recognition that he was different from whatever had come before. Marcus turned toward the door, then stopped. Without looking back, he spoke into the wind. I have a cabin 50 yards from here. There is a fire and more food. You can stay in the stable if you want, but you will freeze to death before morning. He paused, letting the words sink in. I do not sell people. I never have, and I never will. He pushed open the door and stepped out into the storm, leaving the lantern behind so she would have light. He did not look back to see if she was following. He simply walked through the snow, one foot in front of the other, trusting that whatever decision she made would be the right one for her. He was halfway to the cabin when he heard the stable door creak open behind him. The cabin was small but sturdy, built by Marcus's own hands in the first year after he arrived in Hunter Creek Valley, when the memory of Sarah was still fresh enough to drive him to exhaustion every night. He had needed something to do with his hands, something to occupy his mind, something to keep him from putting the barrel of his revolver in his mouth and ending the constant ache in his chest. The cabin had saved his life in a way. It had given him purpose when purpose seemed impossible. Now, as he pushed open the door and stepped into the warmth of the fire he had left burning, he wondered if the cabin was about to serve a similar purpose for someone else. She came through the door behind him like a storm herself, ducking low to avoid hitting her head on the frame, her massive body seeming to fill the entire room with its presence. In the better light of the fire, he could see the full extent of her injuries. The lash marks on her back were deep and infected the skin around them, swollen and hot to the touch. Her wrists were rubbed raw to the bone in places. There were bruises on her face, her ribs, her thighs, bruises in the shape of fists and boots, and worse. She had been beaten repeatedly and systematically by people who knew exactly how much damage they could inflict without killing her. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the winter outside. He knew what she was. He had seen Apache warriors before during his time with the cavalry, and he had seen what happened to those who were captured by the wrong kind of men. The slave trade in native women was an open secret in the territories, a dirty business that everyone knew about and no one talked about. A business that turned human beings into livestock and treated them worse than any animal deserved to be treated. She had escaped from that business. Escaped or been thrown away when she proved too difficult to handle. Sit by the fire. His voice was gentle, the same voice he had used to calm frightened horses and skittish cattle. I have medicine and bandages. I will help you if you let me. The giant woman stood in the center of the room, her head nearly touching the ceiling, her golden eyes moving from the fire to the door, to the windows, to the knife block on the counter. She was mapping the space, identifying weapons and exits, preparing for the moment when she would need to fight or flee. It was the behavior of a hunted animal, and it broke something in Marcus's heart to see it. Why? Her voice was stronger now, but still rough with exhaustion and pain. Why would you help me? Because you need help. And because I have no one else to help. The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and completely unexpected. Marcus was not sure why he had said them. He was not sure of anything anymore, except that this woman was in his cabin, and she was bleeding, and he was not going to let her die. She studied him for a long moment, those golden eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she moved slowly toward the fire and lowered herself onto the floor, her back to the flames, her face toward the door. She was still ready to run, still ready to fight, but she was also willing to rest. Marcus gathered the medicine and bandages from the cabinet where he kept them, the same supplies he had used on himself when he fell from the roof last spring and broke 2 ribs. He approached her slowly, making sure she could see his hands at all times, and knelt beside her. This will hurt, he warned, but it will help. She did not respond. She simply turned her back to him, exposing the ruined landscape of her flesh, and waited. Marcus worked in silence, cleaning the wounds with whiskey and water, applying the herbal salve that the old Apache medicine man in town had taught him to make, wrapping the worst of the injuries in clean bandages. She did not make a sound throughout the entire process, not a single gasp or whimper, though he knew the pain must have been extraordinary. He had seen soldiers scream from wounds half as severe as these. She simply sat there still as stone, her hands clenched into fists on her knees, her breathing carefully controlled. When he was finished, he rose and stepped back, giving her space. He went to the stove and ladled stew from the pot that had been simmering since morning, filling a bowl and placing it on the floor beside her along with a spoon and a piece of bread. Eat, sleep. We will talk in the morning. He crossed to his own bed in the corner of the room and sat down, pulling off his boots and setting them beside the fire to dry. He could feel her eyes on him, watching his every move, waiting for the moment when he would reveal his true intentions. But he had no intentions beyond what he had already said. He was tired and she was hurt, and the storm outside was going to last for days. "What is your name?" She asked the question suddenly, as if the words had escaped against her will. "Marcus Cole." A long pause. Then so quietly he almost missed it, Kaya. Marcus nodded. "Get some rest, Kaya. You are safe here." He lay down on his bed and closed his eyes, though he did not expect to sleep. He was acutely aware of her presence in the room, the sound of her breathing, the creak of the floor when she shifted her weight. She was dangerous, he knew. Probably more dangerous than any person he had ever met. But she was also injured and alone and terrified, and those things mattered more to him than the danger. The storm howled outside, and Marcus Cole lay in his bed listening to the wind, wondering what the morning would bring. He woke to the feeling of cold steel against his throat. Kaya stood over him in the darkness, her massive body blocking the dying light of the fire, her hands steady as she pressed the blade of his own hunting knife against his jugular. Her golden eyes glowed in the shadows, and in them Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Not anger, not hatred, but something far worse. Fear. The absolute primal terror of a creature that has been hurt so many times it no longer believes safety is possible. "Tell me why I should not kill you." Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of mountains. "Tell me why you are different from all the others." Marcus did not move. He barely breathed. He knew that one wrong word, one wrong gesture would end his life in a spray of blood on the pillow beneath his head. He had seen men die from wounds to the throat. It was not a peaceful death. "I cannot tell you why you should not kill me." The words came slowly, carefully measured. "I can only tell you why I have not killed you." Her eyes narrowed, but the pressure of the knife did not increase. She was listening. "3 years ago, I had a wife. Her name was Sarah. She was pregnant with our first child when the fever came through the valley. I watched her die over the course of 7 days. I held her hand when she took her last breath. I buried her and the baby that never got to be born in the field behind this cabin." He paused, feeling the old grief rise up in his chest like a wave he had learned to ride, but never to escape. "After that, I spent a long time wanting to die. I put the barrel of my gun in my mouth more times than I can count, but I could never pull the trigger. I kept thinking about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see me. She would be ashamed. She would tell me that giving up was the coward's way out. So I lived. I built this cabin with my own hands. I raised cattle and horses. I survived. And I told myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way Sarah would have wanted me to help them, I would do it. No questions asked, no payment expected." The knife trembled slightly against his throat. Kaya's face was still hidden in shadow, but he could hear the change in her breathing, the slight hitch that suggested his words had struck something deep within her. "You came into my stable bleeding and broken and half dead from cold. You are the first person I have had the chance to help in 3 years, so I helped you. That is all. That is everything." For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind continued to howl outside, the fire continued to crackle and pop, and the knife continued to press against Marcus's throat. Then slowly, Kaya pulled the blade away. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She simply turned and walked back to her place by the fire, lowering herself to the floor, with her back against the wall, the knife still clutched in her hand. But she was no longer looking at him with the eyes of a predator measuring its prey. She was looking at him with something else, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Marcus let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his teeth. He had come within inches of death, and he was surprised to find that the experience had not frightened him as much as he would have expected. Perhaps 3 years of wanting to die had made him less afraid of it than he should have been. Or perhaps it was simply that he understood why Kaya had done what she had done, and he could not bring himself to blame her for it. I'm going to sleep now, he said quietly. If you want to kill me, you can do it while I sleep. I will not fight you. He turned over onto his side, facing away from her, and closed his eyes. It was the most vulnerable position he could put himself in, and he knew it. He was telling her without words that he trusted her not to hurt him, that he was placing his life in. The last thing he heard before sleep took him was the soft sound of the knife being placed on the floor. Morning came gray and cold, the storm still raging outside, but with less intensity than the night before. Marcus woke to find Kaya exactly where he had last seen her, seated against the wall by the fire, her golden eyes open and alert. He wondered if she had slept at all. He rose and went to the stove, adding wood to the fire and setting a pot of water to boil for coffee. His movements were slow and deliberate, giving her plenty of time to track his position, to know exactly where he was and what he was doing at every moment. He understood now that trust would have to be earned in small increments through consistent behavior over time. She had spent too long in the hands of people who hurt her to believe in kindness at first sight. I'm going to check on the horses, he said as he pulled on his boots. I will be back in a few minutes. There is bread and dried meat on the table if you are hungry. She did not respond, but her eyes followed him as he walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the latch, struck by a sudden thought. The knife you took last night. Keep it. I have others. Then he pushed open the door and stepped out into the storm. The horses were restless but unharmed, their breath fogging in the cold air as Marcus moved between the stalls, checking water buckets and distributing hay. The routine of the work was soothing, a familiar rhythm that allowed his mind to wander over the events of the past 12 hours. A giant Apache woman was living in his cabin. She had almost killed him in the night. He had told her about Sarah, something he had never spoken of to anyone since the burial. And despite all of that, he felt more alive than he had in years. It was a strange feeling, and he did not entirely trust it. He had learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing, a trap that promised salvation and delivered only deeper despair. He had hoped that Sarah would recover from the fever. He had hoped that the baby would survive. Both hopes had been crushed, and he had sworn never to hope for anything again. But standing in the stable, listening to the wind howl and the horses stamp, he could not help but feel that something had changed, that the universe had sent him this wounded warrior woman for a reason, and that whatever happened next would be different from everything that had come before. He finished his work with the horses and returned to the cabin, stamping the snow from his boots before pushing open the door. Kaya was exactly where he had left her, but she had moved closer to the fire and the bread and meat he had pointed out were gone. A good sign. She was eating, which meant she intended to serve. How long will the storm last? Her voice cut through the silence, stronger now than it had been the night before. 3 days, maybe 4. It is hard to say. She nodded, processing this information. Her golden eyes moved to the window where the snow was piling up against the glass, already reaching halfway up the frame. I cannot stay here for 4 days. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee and carried one to her, setting it on the floor within her reach, but not so close that she would have to take it from his hand. Why not? They will be looking for me. The men who, she stopped, her jaw tightening, the men I escaped from. They do not give up easily. How many? She considered the question, her eyes going distant as she counted. 4, maybe 5. Their leader is a man named Silas Blackwood. He has been trading in native women for 15 years. He thinks of us as property, and he does not like losing his property. Marcus filed the name away in his memory. Silas Blackwood. He had heard that name before, whispered in the saloons and trading posts of the territory. A dangerous man by all accounts. The kind of man who would chase a escaped captive to the ends of the earth if it meant recovering his investment. They will not find you here. His voice was calm, certain. This valley is remote and the storm has covered any tracks you might have left. Even if they know you came this direction, they will not be able to search effectively until the weather clears. And when the weather clears, then we will deal with them. Kaya stared at him, her expression unreadable. We? Marcus shrugged. I told you I do not sell people. I also do not let people get taken by slavers while they are guests in my home. For a long moment she said nothing. Then so quietly he almost missed it. You are a strange man, Marcus Cole. He allowed himself a small smile. I have been told that before. The days that followed were strange and tense, filled with long silences and careful movements. and the constant awareness of two wounded creatures learning to share the same space. Kaya's wounds began to heal under Marcus's care, the infected flesh responding to the medicine and bandages, the color returning to her copper skin. But the wounds that could not be seen, the ones carved deep into her mind and spirit, those showed no signs of healing at all. She did not speak of what had been done to her in captivity. She did not need to. Marcus could read the story in the way she flinched when he moved too quickly, in the way she positioned herself always with her back to the wall, and her eyes on the door, in the way she slept with the knife clutched in her hand and woke at the slightest sound. She had been broken systematically and deliberately by men who wanted to crush her spirit and make her compliant. They had failed, but the attempt had left scars that might never fully heal. On the third day of the storm, when the wind had finally begun to ease and the snow had stopped falling, Kaya surprised him by asking a question. "You said you were with the cavalry. How do you know what I am?" Marcus looked up from the rifle he was cleaning, his hands pausing on the oiled rag. "I spent 5 years riding with the army in the Arizona Territory. I fought against your people, and I fought alongside them. I learned to recognize an Apache warrior when I see one." Her golden eyes narrowed. "You fought against us, I did, and I am not proud of everything I did in those years." He set the rifle down and turned to face her, fully knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she ever trusted him again. "I was young and stupid, and I believed everything my commanding officers told me. I believed that your people were savages who needed to be civilized or exterminated. I believed that the land belonged to us by right of conquest. I believed a lot of things that I now know were lies." He took a deep breath, letting the old guilt wash over him like cold water. "I saw things that changed me. I saw children shot for sport. I saw women violated and murdered. I saw elders left to die of starvation and exposure because they were too old to be worth keeping alive. And I realized that the real savages were not the people I had been sent to fight. They were the people I was fighting alongside. So I left. I deserted my post and came here to the edge of nowhere where I could live out my days without being part of the machine anymore. That was 11 years ago. I have not worn the uniform since." Kaya listened to his confession in silence, her face giving nothing away. When he finished, she sat very still for a long moment, her golden eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. "My father was killed by cavalry soldiers," she said finally. "My mother was taken to a reservation where she died of the white man's diseases. My brothers were scattered to the four winds, and I do not know if any of them still live." Marcus felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders like stones. "I am sorry. Your sorrow changes nothing." "I know." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. The suspicion was still there, and the pain and the carefully controlled rage. But underneath all of that, he caught a glimpse of something else. A willingness to consider the possibility that not everyone was the enemy. "You left," she said slowly. "You saw the truth and you chose to walk away." "Yes, that takes courage. More courage than most of your people possess." Marcus shook his head. "It took cowardice. I should have stayed and fought against the injustice from inside. Instead, I ran. Perhaps," Kaya's voice softened slightly, "or perhaps you knew that some battles cannot be won from within. Perhaps running was the only honest choice available to you." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them, the wind moaning softly outside the cabin walls. Something had shifted in the space between them. Some wall had come down just enough to let a sliver of light through. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might one day become trust if they were both brave enough to let it grow. That night, Marcus woke to the sound of screaming. Kaya was thrashing on the floor, her massive body convulsing, her hands clawing at the air, as if fighting off invisible attackers. Her eyes were closed, but the sounds coming from her throat were the sounds of someone being tortured, high and raw and full of animal terror. Marcus moved without thinking, crossing the room in 3 quick strides and dropping to his knees beside her. He knew better than to touch her, knew that waking a nightmare-trapped warrior with physical contact was a good way to get killed. Instead, he spoke, his voice loud and firm and as steady as he could make it. "Kaya, Kaya, wake up. You are safe. You are in my cabin. No one is hurting you. Kaya, wake up." Her eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing, and her hands shot out with terrifying speed, closing around his throat with enough force to crush his windpipe. Marcus did not struggle. He simply looked into her golden eyes and kept speaking, even though the words were barely more than a whisper now. It is Marcus. You are safe. You are in the cabin. The storm is outside. No one is here but us. You are safe, Kaya. You are safe. Slowly, painfully slowly, the madness faded from her eyes. Her grip on his throat loosened and her hand fell away. She stared at him for a long moment, her chest heaving, her face slick with sweat, and then she did something he had never expected to see. She began to cry. The tears came silently at first, sliding down her cheeks like rain on stone. Then the sobs followed, great racking convulsions that shook her entire body, sounds of grief and rage and despair that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat, from some place within her that had been locked away for years and was now finally breaking free. Marcus did not try to comfort her. He simply sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence, far enough that she did not feel trapped. He let her cry, let her release the poison that had been building inside her for God knew how long, and when the storm of tears finally passed, he handed her a cup of water and spoke softly. You do not have to talk about it, but if you ever want to, I will listen. Kaya took the water with trembling hands and drank deeply. When she lowered the cup, her golden eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, but clearer than he had ever seen them. They kept me in a cage, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, like an animal. They fed me scraps and beat me when I did not obey. They sold me twice before I managed to escape, and each time the buyer was worse than the last. She paused, and Marcus saw her hands clench into fists. The last one, a rancher in Colorado, he wanted to breed me. Wanted to create a race of giant workers for his mines. He kept me chained in a barn and brought other men too. She stopped, unable or unwilling to continue. Marcus felt a cold rage building in his chest, the kind of anger he had not felt since his days in the cavalry. He wanted to find this rancher and every man who had touched her and kill them all slowly and painfully in ways that would make them beg for death long before it came. But he said none of this. He simply nodded, acknowledging her pain, and let the silence stretch between them. I killed 3 of them, Kaya continued after a long moment. When I finally broke free of the chains, I tore their throats out with my hands and teeth. But there were more, always more, and I was weak from months of captivity. So I ran. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and placed his hand over her clenched fist. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that. She looked at him, and for the first time since she had arrived in his stable, he saw something like hope flickering in her golden eyes. Why do you care? After everything your people have done to mine, why do you care what happens to me? Because you are a person, and because what was done to you was wrong, and because he paused, searching for the right words, because I spent too many years not caring. I cannot do that anymore. Kaya stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. They sat like that until dawn, 2 wounded creatures finding comfort in each other's presence while the storm outside finally began to fade. The morning of the 4th day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed almost obscene after so many days of gray. Marcus stood on the porch of the cabin watching the sun rise over the snow-covered mountains, feeling the first hints of warmth on his face. The storm was over. The world was opening up again, and with it, the danger would return. He heard Kaya moving inside the cabin, her heavy footsteps making the floorboards creak and groan. She had recovered remarkably quickly from her injuries, her body healing with a speed that seemed almost supernatural. The Apache were renowned for their resilience, but even so, her recuperation was impressive. She was nearly back to full strength now, and with that strength had come a restlessness that Marcus recognized all too well. She emerged onto the porch beside him, ducking under the doorframe, and stood looking out at the valley. In the clear morning light, her features were sharp and striking, her high cheekbones and strong jaw, giving her face a regal quality that matched her warrior bearing. She was, Marcus thought again, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. They will come today. Her voice was flat, certain. The snow has stopped, and they will have been waiting for exactly this moment. Marcus nodded. Probably. You should let me leave. Draw them away from here. It is not your fight. He turned to look at her, meeting her golden eyes with his own steady gaze. Like hell it is not. Before she could respond, a sound carried across the valley. faint but unmistakable, the sound of horse hooves on snow. Kaya's entire body went rigid, her hands curling into fists, her golden eyes narrowing to slits. They are here. Marcus walked back into the cabin and took his rifle from its place above the fireplace. He checked the ammunition chambered around and returned to the porch. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were steady. How many, he asked. Kaya tilted her head, listening. 4 horses, maybe 5. Then we have the advantage. They do not know I am here, and they do not know you are armed. She looked at him, something flickering in her eyes that might have been surprise or respect or both. You mean to fight them? I mean to send them away. And if they will not go, then yes, I mean to fight them. You could die. Marcus smiled, a thin, cold expression that did not reach his eyes. Everyone dies. The question is what you die for. The horses appeared at the far end of the valley, 5 dark shapes against the brilliant white of the snow. Even at this distance, Marcus could see that the riders were armed, could see the rifles slung across their backs and the pistols at their hips. They were not merchants or travelers or anyone with legitimate business in Hunter Creek Valley. They were hunters, and they had come for their prey. Kaya stepped back into the doorway of the cabin, positioning herself where she could see without being seen. Her golden eyes tracked the approaching riders with the focused intensity of a predator watching its quarry. The one in front, she said quietly, that is Silas Blackwood. Marcus squinted at the lead rider, trying to make out his features. He saw a broad-shouldered man in a black coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat, his bearing carrying the confidence of someone who was accustomed to getting what he wanted through force. What do you know about him? He is cruel, smarter than he looks. He has connections with important men in the territory, men who protect him from the law. He has been doing this for years, and he has never been caught. Marcus filed this information away, adding it to what he already knew. A connected man, a dangerous man, but also a man who had come to his valley uninvited, seeking to take someone under his protection. In the West, that was grounds for killing. Stay inside, he said. Do not come out unless I call for you. Kaya started to protest, but Marcus cut her off with a look. They do not know you are here. That is our advantage. If this goes bad, you can escape through the back window and disappear into the mountains. But if they see you, that option disappears. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. Do not die, Marcus Cole. I will do my best. He stepped off the porch and walked toward the approaching riders, his rifle held loosely at his side, his heart pounding, but his face calm. The snow crunched beneath his boots, each step carrying him closer to a confrontation he had not sought but would not run from. The riders pulled up about 50 yards from the cabin, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Marcus counted 5 men, all armed, all looking at him with the flat, assessing eyes of predators. The one in front, the one Kaya had identified as Silas Blackwood, nudged his horse forward a few steps and tipped his hat back, revealing a hard, weathered face with cold blue eyes and a smile that held no warmth at all. Good morning, friend. His voice was surprisingly pleasant, the voice of a businessman rather than a slaver. Nice spread you have here. Very remote, very private. Marcus did not smile back. Can I help you gentlemen with something? Blackwood's smile widened. Indeed you can. We are looking for a runaway, a large woman, Apache by blood. She escaped from lawful custody about a week ago, and we have reason to believe she came this direction. I have not seen anyone matching that description. Is that so? Blackwood tilted his head, his cold eyes studying Marcus with unsettling intensity. Because one of my men found tracks leading into this valley. Large tracks, much too large for any normal person. Marcus shrugged. The mountains are full of strange things. Bears, elk, mountain lions. Could have been anything. One of the other riders, a burly man with a scarred face, let out a harsh laugh. Bears do not wear shoes, rancher. Neither do mountain lions yet. Here you are. Marcus let his eyes drift over the 5 men, his expression contemptuous. Riding around in the dead of winter looking for a woman. What kind of men does that make you, I wonder? The scarred man's face darkened, and his hand moved toward his gun, but Blackwood held up a hand to stop him. Easy, Colt. The man is just asking questions. He has a right to ask questions. Blackwood turned back to Marcus, his smile never wavering. To answer your question, friend, we are businessmen. The woman we seek is valuable property, and we intend to recover her. If you have seen her, if you know where she is, it would be in your best interest to tell us now. We can make it worth your while. And if I have not seen her, then we will search your property to satisfy ourselves that you are telling the truth. After that, we will be on our way. Marcus felt the cold weight of the rifle in his hand. He thought about Kaya hidden in the cabin behind him. He thought about Sarah buried in the field beyond the pasture. He thought about all the things he had done and all the things he had failed to do, and he made his choice. You will not search my property. You will not set foot on my land without my permission. And you will turn your horses around and ride back the way you came right now. Blackwood's smile finally faded. His blue eyes went flat and dangerous, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of pleasantness. That would be a mistake, friend, a very serious mistake. Marcus raised his rifle, not quite pointing it at Blackwood, but making it clear that he could at any moment. The only mistake here is yours. You came to my valley looking for trouble. You found it. Now you can leave on your horses or you can leave across them. The choice is yours. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind had died down and the silence was absolute, broken only by the soft sounds of horses breathing and leather creaking. Marcus could feel the tension in the air, could feel the violence gathering like a storm about to break. Then Blackwood laughed, a short, harsh sound that held no humor at all. You have spirit, friend, I will give you that. But spirit will not stop a bullet, and there are 5 of us and 1 of you. Maybe, but I will kill at least 2 of you before I go down. And I will make sure you are one of them. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, and Marcus saw something flicker in those cold blue eyes. Not fear exactly, but calculation, a reassessment of the situation. Finally, Blackwood pulled on his reins, turning his horse around. This is not over, friend. We will be back, and when we return, we will bring more men and less patience. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Enjoy your solitude while you can. The 5 riders turned and rode away their horses, kicking up plumes of snow as they disappeared back up the valley. Marcus watched them until they were out of sight, his rifle still raised, his heart still pounding. Only when the last echo of hoofbeats had faded did he allow himself to lower the weapon and turn back toward the cabin. Kaya was standing on the porch, her golden eyes bright with an emotion he could not quite name. You could have been killed. Marcus shrugged. Maybe. But I was not. He walked past her into the cabin, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline draining out of him and leaving only a bone-deep weariness in its wake. He set the rifle down and sat heavily in the chair by the fire, his hands trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. Kaya followed him inside, closing the door behind her. She stood over him for a long moment, her massive frame blocking the light from the window, her expression unreadable. Why, she asked finally. Why would you risk your life for someone you barely know? Marcus looked up at her, and in that moment, he saw not a giant Apache warrior, not a dangerous stranger, not a problem to be solved. He saw a woman, a person, someone who had been through hell and come out the other side scarred but unbroken. Because you are worth risking my life for, he said simply. And because I made a promise to myself a long time ago. A promise that I would never stand by and watch injustice happen again. Not if I had the power to stop it. Chaos stared at him, her golden eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. Slowly, she knelt beside his chair, bringing her face level with his. Her hand reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers surprisingly gentle for their size. You are a fool, Marcus Cole. Probably. And I do not deserve your kindness. That is not for you to decide. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of intimacy that surprised them both. Her skin was warm, her breath soft on his face. I will not forget this, she whispered. Whatever happens next, I will not forget what you did for me today. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her presence, the weight of the moment. Outside, the sun continued to rise over the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow-covered valley. Inside, 2 wounded souls had taken another step toward each other, bridging a gap that should have been unbridgeable. The battle was not over. Blackwood would return as he had promised. More men, more guns, more danger. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. And that was enough. The days after Blackwood's departure settled into a tense rhythm each morning, bringing the same unspoken question. Would today be the day they returned? Marcus spent his hours fortifying what could be fortified, boarding up windows that faced the approach to the valley, stockpiling ammunition, mapping escape routes through the mountains that Kaya could use if everything went wrong. She watched his preparations with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been guilt, knowing that all of this was because of her, because she had stumbled into his stable half dead and brought her troubles crashing into his quiet life. On the fifth day after the confrontation, Kaya insisted on helping with the work. Her wounds had closed completely now, leaving only faint scars on her copper skin, and she moved with a fluid grace that belied her enormous size. Marcus watched her lift fence posts that would have taken him 10 minutes of struggling and plant them in the frozen ground with single powerful strokes. She was stronger than any person he had ever seen, man or woman, and yet there was nothing brutish about her strength. It was controlled, precise, the product of a lifetime of training and discipline. You fight like a warrior, he observed, as they worked side by side repairing a section of fence that the storm had damaged. But you move like a dancer. Kaya paused a fence post balanced on her shoulder and looked at him with an expression he could not read. My grandmother was a medicine woman. She taught me that true strength comes from balance, not from force. A warrior who cannot dance will never defeat an enemy who can. Marcus considered this, turning the idea over in his mind like a stone in his hand. I never learned to dance. Sarah tried to teach me once, but I kept stepping on her feet. The mention of his dead wife brought a flicker of something across Kaya's face. Not pity exactly. Something closer to recognition. Tell me about her. It was not a demand, but it was not quite a request either. It was an invitation offered in the same spirit as the stories she had begun to share with him over the past few days. An exchange of truths building the foundation of something neither of them had expected to find. Marcus set down the hammer he had been using and leaned against the fence, his eyes drifting to the field where Sarah was buried, the simple wooden cross barely visible beneath the snow. She was small, barely came up to my chest, but she had a fire in her that made her seem 10 feet tall. She could talk anyone into anything, and she was never afraid to speak her mind, even when it got her into trouble. He smiled at the memory, a sad smile that held equal parts joy and grief. We met in St. Louis at a church social. I was just back from the cavalry, angry and lost, and looking for a fight. She walked right up to me and told me I had the saddest eyes she had ever seen. Then she asked me to dance. Kaya set down the fence post and moved closer, her golden eyes intent on his face. And you stepped on her feet every single time. But she never complained. She just laughed and said she would teach me to be graceful if it killed her. The words caught in his throat and he had to look away. It did not kill her. The fever did that. But sometimes I wonder if I was part of it, if my clumsiness, my inability to be what she needed, if that somehow made her weaker. Kaya was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch warmed through the fabric of his coat. Grief makes us blame ourselves for things we could not control. It is a way of holding on to the person we lost, of keeping them close, even when they are gone. But it is also a lie. You did not kill your wife, Marcus Cole. The fever did, and nothing you could have done would have changed that. Marcus looked up at her, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. You sound like you know something about grief. Kaya's golden eyes went distant, seeing something far beyond the snow-covered valley. I have lost everyone I ever loved. My father, my mother, my brothers. My entire tribe was scattered or destroyed. For a long time I believed that I was cursed, that everyone who came close to me was doomed to suffer. She paused, her jaw tightening. Then I realized that the curse was not mine. It was the world's. The world takes what it wants, and we are left to pick up the pieces. And what do you do with the pieces? Kaya looked at him, and for the first time he saw a crack in the armor she wore. A glimpse of the wounded woman beneath the warrior's exterior. You build something new, or you let the pieces cut you until there is nothing left. Those are the only choices. They stood in silence after that, two people shaped by loss finding unexpected common ground in the wreckage of their past. The wind picked up, sending snow swirling around their feet, and Marcus realized that he had stopped feeling cold. Come on, he said finally, let us finish this fence before dark. I do not want to give Blackwood any easy ways onto the property. Kaya nodded and picked up the fence post again, but there was something different in the way she moved now, something lighter, as if a weight she had been carrying for years had shifted slightly, becoming just a little easier to bear. That night, Marcus taught her how to play cards. It was a foolish idea born of the restlessness that came from being trapped in a small cabin with nothing to do but wait for violence. But Kaya seemed intrigued by the concept, and watching her massive hands struggle with the tiny cards provided a welcome distraction from the tension that had been building for days. This game makes no sense. She scowled at the cards in her hand, trying to arrange them into something resembling order. Why would anyone want to collect small pieces of paper? It is not about the paper, it is about the strategy, reading your opponent, predicting their moves, knowing when to bet and when to fold. Kaya snorted. In my culture, we settle disputes with combat. It is simpler. Simpler, maybe. But card games do not leave you bleeding on the ground. She conceded the point with a grudging nod and returned her attention to the cards. After a few more hands, she began to understand the basics, and by the end of the evening, she was beating him more often than not. You are a quick learner, Marcus admitted, as she swept the pile of wooden chips toward her side of the table. I am a warrior. We learn to adapt, or we die. There was no boasting in her voice, just a simple statement of fact. Marcus found himself wondering what it must have been like to grow up in a world where every day was a battle for survival, where the skills of war were as essential as breathing. Will you teach me something? He asked. Kaya looked up curious. What would you want to learn? How to move like you do, how to fight without weapons. She studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes assessing his body, his posture, the way he held himself. You are too stiff, too bound by your own muscles. A fighter must be fluid like water. Then teach me to be fluid. A hint of a smile played at the corner of her mouth. It will hurt. I can handle pain. The smile widened, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. We shall see. The next morning, true to her word, Kaya began his education in Apache combat techniques. They cleared a space in the snow behind the cabin, and she showed him the basic stances, the way to shift weight and redirect force, the thousand small adjustments that separated a brawler from a true warrior. Marcus had fought before. He had killed men in the cavalry, had defended himself in saloons and trading posts across the territory. But he quickly realized that everything he knew was crude and inefficient compared to what Kaya was teaching him. She moved like smoke, like wind, like something that existed in a different relationship to gravity than ordinary humans. Every time he thought he had her, she was somewhere else, and every time he left an opening, she exploited it with ruthless precision. By the end of the first session, he was bruised from head to toe and gasping for breath. Kaya stood over him, not even winded, a look of mild disappointment on her face. You fight like a white man, all force, no thought. Marcus pushed himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his ribs. That is because I'm a white man. Then learn to be something else. Your body is capable of more than you know. You have simply never asked it to perform. She offered him her hand and he took it, allowing her to pull him upright. Her grip was like iron, and he could feel the calluses on her palm, the evidence of a lifetime of training and struggle. Same time tomorrow, he asked. She nodded. And the day after, and the day after that. Learning to fight takes years, not days. But we will start with what time we have. As the days passed, Marcus began to improve. Not quickly and not dramatically, but enough that Kaya no longer looked quite so disappointed at the end of their sessions. He learned to read her movements, to anticipate her attacks, to use her own momentum against her. He would never be her equal, he knew that. But he might become good enough to be useful. The training served another purpose as well. It gave them something to do together, something physical and demanding that burned off the tension that had been building between them. Because tension there was growing stronger with each passing day. Marcus felt it every time their bodies touched during sparring, every time he caught her watching him when she thought he was not looking. And he knew from the way her breath quickened when he stood too close that she felt it too. But neither of them spoke of it. They were both too wounded, too wary, too aware of the danger that surrounded them to allow themselves the luxury of desire. The attraction was there, undeniable and growing, but it remained unacknowledged, a third presence in the cabin that neither of them wanted to name. On the 10th day after Blackwood's departure, a stranger rode into the valley. Marcus saw him first, a lone figure on horseback approaching from the south, moving slowly through the snow. He called for Kaya, and she emerged from the cabin, her hand resting on the knife at her belt, her golden eyes tracking the rider's progress. One man, she said, no weapons visible. Could be a scout. Could be. Or could be someone who lost their way in the mountains. They watched as the rider drew closer, eventually resolving into the figure of an elderly man on a tired horse. He wore the clothing of a preacher, black coat and white collar, and his face was weathered by years of sun and wind. When he saw them watching from the porch, he raised a hand in greeting. "Hello there." He had a voice like gravel, rough but warm. "I am looking for a man named Marcus Cole. Been told he lives in this valley." Marcus stepped forward, his hand still resting on his rifle. "You found him. What do you want?" The preacher dismounted slowly, his movements stiff from hours in the saddle. "My name is Abraham Jenkins. I am the pastor of the church in Red Valley. I came to warn you." "Warn me about what?" Jenkins looked from Marcus to Kaya, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her height and bearing. But he recovered quickly, his expression settling into one of grim determination. "Silas Blackwood has been recruiting men, spreading word that there is a fugitive in Hunter Creek Valley, a dangerous savage who attacked him and his companions. He is offering a bounty for anyone who helps him bring her back." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "How much?" $500. "Dead or alive?" Kaya made a sound low in her throat, something between a growl and a laugh. "I am worth more than that." Jenkins turned to look at her, and Marcus saw something unexpected in the old preacher's eyes. "Not fear, not disgust. Respect. I have no doubt of that, ma'am. But the bounty has attracted attention. There are men riding in from across the territory drawn by the promise of easy money. Blackwood is gathering them at his ranch, preparing to move against you." "How many?" Marcus asked. "Last count 15. Maybe more by now." Marcus exchanged a look with Kaya. 15 men was far more than they could handle, even with her strength and his determination. "Why are you telling us this?" Kaya's voice was suspicious. "What do you gain?" Jenkins sighed, his weathered face creasing with weariness. "I have known Silas Blackwood for 20 years. I have watched him build his empire on the backs of stolen women, watched him corrupt judges and sheriffs and anyone else who might have stopped him. I have preached against him from my pulpit, and I have been threatened, beaten, and nearly killed for my troubles." He looked up at them, and Marcus saw a fire burning in those old eyes. "I am tired of being silent. I am tired of letting evil flourish because good men are too afraid to stand against it. If you are going to fight Blackwood, I want to help." "And how exactly do you propose to help?" Marcus asked. "You are one old man with a Bible." Jenkins smiled, a hard smile that did not match his priestly appearance. "I may be old, but I am not useless. I know the territory. I know where Blackwood keeps his supplies, where his men sleep, what routes they use to move their cargo. And I know people, good people who have been waiting for someone to lead them against him." Marcus considered this, turning the possibilities over in his mind. "How many people?" Jenkins shrugged. 20, maybe 30. Ranchers, miners, townspeople, who have lost daughters and sisters to Blackwood's men. They are not soldiers, but they are angry, and anger can be a powerful weapon. Kaya stepped forward, her massive form casting a shadow over the old preacher. "Why should we trust you? This could be a trap. Blackwood could have sent you to lower our defenses. He could have." Jenkins agreed, but he did not. "I give you my word before God that I am here to help, not to harm. Your God and mine are not the same. Perhaps not, but I believe they share a hatred of injustice. And what Blackwood does to your people, what he has done to you, that is the purest form of injustice I have ever witnessed." Kaya studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded. "I will give you a chance, preacher. But if you betray us, I will kill you myself." Jenkins nodded solemnly. "Fair enough." They brought him inside and gave him coffee, and for the next several hours the old preacher told them everything he knew about Silas Blackwood. He had been born wealthy, the son of a plantation owner in Georgia. When the war ended and slavery was abolished, his family had lost everything, and the young Silas had vowed to rebuild their fortune by any means necessary. He had come west in search of opportunity and found it in the trafficking of native women, a business that was technically illegal, but widely ignored by the authorities. "He has connections everywhere," Jenkins explained. "Judges who owe him money, sheriffs who receive a percentage of his profits, politicians who look the other way in exchange for campaign contributions. He is protected by a web of corruption that stretches across the entire territory." "Then how do we fight him?" Marcus asked. "If the law will not help us, what chance do we have?" Jenkins leaned forward, his eyes intense. The law will not help us, but the people might. Blackwood has made enemies over the years, many enemies. Fathers who lost daughters, husbands who lost wives, brothers who lost sisters. They have been waiting for someone to stand against him, someone strong enough to give them hope. And you think we are those people? I think you might be. Jenkins looked from Marcus to Kaya. A white man and an Apache woman standing together against injustice. That is a symbol, whether you intend it to be or not. A symbol of what the West could be if we had the courage to make it so. Marcus glanced at Kaya, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her golden eyes. They had not asked for this. They had not wanted to become leaders of a rebellion or symbols of anything. They were just two wounded people trying to survive. But sometimes survival was not enough. Sometimes you had to fight for something larger than yourself, or the survival would be meaningless. "What do you need from us?" he asked finally. Jenkins smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw hope in the old man's face. "For now, just your permission. Permission to spread the word that there are people willing to stand against Blackwood. Permission to gather those who are ready to fight. And then we wait. We build our strength. And when Blackwood comes for you, we will be ready." It was a desperate plan built on hope and anger and the thin thread of shared grievance. But it was also the only plan they had. Marcus looked at Kaya. She met his gaze and held it, and in that moment something passed between them. An understanding, a commitment, a choice to face whatever came together regardless of the cost. "Do it," Marcus said. "Spread the word. Tell them to be ready." Jenkins rose and clasped his hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man of his age. "God bless you, Marcus Cole. God bless you both." He left that afternoon riding back toward Red Valley with a list of names and a message of hope. Marcus and Kaya watched him go, standing side by side on the porch, and when his figure had disappeared over the horizon, Kaya spoke. "This changes everything. I know. We were planning to run, to escape. Now we are planning to fight." "Yes." She turned to look at him, her golden eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Marcus thought about the question, really thought about it. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made to himself after her death. He thought about Kaya, about the suffering she had endured and the strength she had shown. He thought about Blackwood and his men, about the countless women who had been stolen and sold and destroyed. And he realized that he had never been more sure of anything in his life. "I want to stop running," he said quietly. "I want to stop letting evil win because good people are too afraid to act. I want to make this valley a place where people like you can be safe. So yes, this is what I want." Kaya was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Then we will fight together." The words hung in the air between them, a vow spoken without ceremony, but no less binding for its simplicity. They stood together in the fading light, two wounded souls united by circumstance and choice, facing an uncertain future with open eyes. The war was coming. They would be ready. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Marcus and Kaya worked from dawn until dark, fortifying the cabin and the surrounding area, creating defensive positions and escape routes, stockpiling weapons and supplies. Jenkins returned twice more, bringing news of their growing support in the territory and the movements of Blackwood's forces. "He is waiting for something," Jenkins reported during his second visit. "I do not know what, but he has not moved against you yet, and that worries me." "Maybe he is afraid," Kaya suggested. "He knows I am here now. He knows I will not go quietly." Jenkins shook his head. "Blackwood does not know fear. He only knows patience. He is planning something, and when he moves, it will be swift and brutal. Then we need to move first." The idea had been forming in Marcus's mind for days, taking shape as he observed the lay of the land and considered their options. A direct assault on Blackwood's ranch was impossible. They did not have the numbers or the firepower to win that kind of fight. But there were other ways to hurt an enemy, ways that did not require overwhelming force. "What are you thinking?" Kaya asked. "I am thinking about what Jenkins said. That Blackwood has supplies, routes, infrastructure. What if we attack those instead of attacking him directly?" Jenkins leaned forward, interest sparking in his old eyes. "Go on. Blackwood traffics in human beings. That means he needs wagons, horses, places to hold his captives before they are sold. If we destroy those things, we disrupt his business. We cost him money. We show his buyers that he cannot be trusted to deliver the goods." Kaya nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her face. And we free any women he is currently holding. Exactly. It was a guerrilla campaign, the kind of warfare that the Apache had practiced for centuries against larger, better armed opponents. Hit and run. Strike where the enemy is weak. Disappear before they can retaliate. It would not defeat Blackwood outright, but it would hurt him. And more importantly, it would show the people of the territory that he could be hurt. I know where he keeps his primary holding facility, Jenkins said. An old ranch about 15 miles east of here. He uses it to process new captives before moving them on to buyers. There are usually no more than 4 or 5 guards at any time. How many captives? Anywhere from 5 to 15, depending on when the shipments come in. Marcus looked at Kaya. Can we do it? She considered the question, her tactical mind running through the possibilities. If we are quick and quiet, yes, but we will need a place to take the freed women. They cannot stay here and they cannot go back to wherever Blackwood took them from. I can arrange that, Jenkins said. There is a mission in the mountains run by a group of nuns who hate Blackwood as much as I do. They will shelter anyone we bring to them. Then we have a plan. They moved 3 nights later under cover of darkness in a new moon that hid their approach. Marcus rode his best horse, with Kaya running alongside, her long legs eating up the distance with supernatural ease. She could run for hours without tiring, a product of her Apache training, and she moved so silently through the snow that even Marcus, watching for her, sometimes lost track of her position. The holding facility was exactly where Jenkins had said it would be, a dilapidated ranch house surrounded by a rough wooden fence. Guards patrolled the perimeter, but there were only 3 of them, and they moved with the bored complacency of men who did not expect trouble. Kaya went first, slipping over the fence like a shadow and taking down the nearest guard before he even knew she was there. Her hand clamped over his mouth, and she applied pressure to his throat, cutting off blood flow to his brain. He was unconscious in seconds, and she lowered him gently to the ground before moving on to the next. Marcus watched from his position outside the fence, marveling at her efficiency. By the time she signaled for him to join her, all 3 guards were down, and the way to the house was clear. Inside, they found 8 women ranging in age from perhaps 15 to 40, huddled together in a single room that stank of human misery. Their eyes widened with fear when the door opened, and several of them shrank back, expecting more abuse. Kaya spoke to them in a language Marcus did not understand, her voice soft and reassuring. Whatever she said seemed to work. The fear in their eyes was replaced with hope, and they rose and followed her out of that place of suffering. The return journey was slower, hampered by the weakness of the freed captives and the need to avoid any pursuit. But they reached the mission by dawn, and the nuns took the women in without question, wrapping them in blankets and feeding them hot soup and speaking to them in gentle voices. Marcus stood outside the mission, watching the sun rise over the mountains, feeling a satisfaction he had not experienced in years. Kaya came to stand beside him, her copper skin glowing in the morning light. We did a good thing today. We did. There will be consequences. I know. Blackwood will come for us now. He cannot let this stand. Marcus turned to look at her, and what he saw in her golden eyes made his breath catch in his throat. She was beautiful, he realized. Not just physically, though she was certainly that. She was beautiful in her strength, her courage, her unwavering commitment to justice. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Let him come, he said quietly. We will be ready. Kaya smiled, a rare expression that transformed her face. Yes, we will. They rode back to the valley together, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus Cole did not feel alone. The retaliation came sooner than expected. 3 days after the raid on the holding facility, Marcus woke to the smell of smoke. He leaped from his bed and ran outside, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The barn was on fire. Flames licked at the wooden walls, reaching hungrily toward the roof, and he could hear the horses screaming inside. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the inferno, his bare feet burning on the heated ground, and threw open the barn doors. The heat hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and searing his skin. But he pushed forward, grabbing halters and cutting ropes, driving the panicked horses toward the open doors. Kaya appeared beside him, her massive form moving through the flames with single-minded determination, saving animals that most people would have left to die. They got all 5 horses out before the roof collapsed, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Marcus stood watching the barn burn, his skin blistered and his lungs aching from the smoke, and felt something cold settle in his chest. This was a warning, yes. Kaya's voice was hard as stone. They want us to know that they can reach us whenever they choose. Then why not attack the cabin? Why not try to kill us? Because killing us is not enough for Blackwood. He wants to break us first, to make us afraid, to make us suffer. Marcus turned to look at her, and what he saw in her golden eyes was not fear. It was fury. He has made a mistake, she continued. He thinks that burning our barn will make us weaker, but it has only made me angrier. What do you want to do? Strike back, harder this time. Make him feel the pain he has caused us. Marcus considered this, weighing the risks against the rewards. Escalation was dangerous. Every time they struck at Blackwood, he would strike back harder. But backing down was not an option either. If they showed weakness now, Blackwood would see it as an invitation to destroy them. Do you have a target in mind? Kaya's smile was cold and predatory. Jenkins told us about Blackwood's supply routes, the wagons that carry provisions to his various operations. Without those supplies, his men cannot eat. His horses cannot be fed. His entire organization grinds to a halt. And you want to attack the wagons, I want to destroy them. Every single one. I want Blackwood to understand that there is no safety, no security, no peace for him as long as I am alive. Marcus looked at her, at the fire reflected in her golden eyes, and made his decision. Then let us get to work. Over the next 2 weeks, they waged a campaign of terror against Blackwood's operations. They attacked supply wagons and burned them to the ground. They freed more captives from holding facilities across the territory. They spread word of their actions through Jenkins's network, building a legend that grew with each passing day. The giant Apache woman and her white companion, the ones who could not be caught, the ones who struck from the shadows and vanished like ghosts, the ones who offered hope to the hopeless and vengeance to the wronged. People began to talk. Some called them heroes, others called them terrorists. But everyone agreed on one thing. They were a force to be reckoned with. And Blackwood was not happy about it. Reports came back to them through Jenkins's network. Blackwood was furious, raging at his men, demanding that they find and capture the ones responsible for disrupting his business. He had doubled the bounty on Kaya's head and added a second bounty for Marcus, $500 for each of them, dead or alive. But it was not just anger, it was also fear. For the first time in 15 years, Silas Blackwood was facing an enemy he could not buy, threaten, or eliminate. And it was driving him to desperate measures. He is gathering his forces, Jenkins reported during one of his visits. All of them. Every man who has ever worked for him, every hired gun he can afford. He is planning a final assault on this valley, an overwhelming force that will crush any resistance. How many? Marcus asked. At last count, over 40. Marcus felt his stomach drop. 40 men was an army. Even with their guerrilla tactics and Kaya's strength, they could not hope to defeat an army. When, within the week, maybe sooner, Kaya stood by the window staring out at the valley that had become her home over the past weeks. Then we need to be ready. Ready! Marcus could hear the desperation in his own voice. How do we get ready to fight 40 men? We do not fight them alone. She turned to face them, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Hope. Real hope, untempered by cynicism or caution. Jenkins has been building a network of supporters, people who hate Blackwood, who want to see him destroyed. How many of them are willing to fight? Jenkins hesitated. Maybe 20, 30 if we are lucky. But they are not soldiers, Kaya. They are farmers and miners and shopkeepers. They have never faced men like Blackwood's killers. Then we will train them. We have a week. It is not much time, but it is enough to teach them the basics, enough to give them a chance. Marcus looked at her, at the determination blazing in her golden eyes, and felt something stir in his chest. She was right. They could not run. They could not hide. The only option left was to stand and fight. And if they were going to fight, they were going to fight together. Start spreading the word, he told Jenkins. Anyone who wants to fight, anyone who is willing to stand against Blackwood, tell them to come here. We will be waiting. Jenkins nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his weathered face. God help us all, he said. The battle for Hunter Creek Valley was about to begin. They came in ones and twos at first, trickling into the valley over the course of the next few days. Farmers with ancient rifles, miners with picks and shovels, fathers who had lost daughters, husbands who had lost wives. They came with fear in their eyes and determination in their hearts, drawn by the legend of the giant Apache woman and the man who stood beside her. Marcus organized them as best he could, drawing on his cavalry training to create something resembling a military structure. He divided them into squads, assigned leaders, established communication protocols. It was rough and improvised, but it was better than nothing. Kaya handled the combat training. She worked with them from dawn until dusk, teaching them the basics of hand-to-hand fighting, showing them how to move quietly through the woods, drilling them in the hit-and-run tactics that had served her people for centuries. "You will not win this fight with strength," she told them. "Blackwood's men are stronger, better armed, more experienced. You will win it with intelligence, with speed, with the knowledge that you are fighting for something worth dying for." The men listened, their eyes fixed on her with a mixture of awe and respect. She was unlike anything they had ever seen, this giant warrior woman who moved like smoke and struck like lightning. And yet there was nothing frightening about her anymore. She was their leader, their teacher, their beacon of hope. By the fifth day, they had 32 fighters, not nearly enough to face Blackwood's army head-on, but enough to make him pay for every inch of ground he tried to take. On the morning of the sixth day, a scout came riding into the valley at full gallop. "They are coming," he gasped, barely able to stay in the saddle. 40 men, maybe more. "They will be here by nightfall." Marcus looked at Kaya. She looked back at him, and in her golden eyes he saw no fear, only resolve. "Then we had better be ready," she said quietly. "Let us show them what we are made of." The final battle for Hunter Creek Valley was about to begin. They positioned their forces according to the plan they had developed over the past week. The main defensive line was at the mouth of the valley, where the narrow approach would limit the advantage of Blackwood's superior numbers. Behind that, a series of fallback positions stretched toward the cabin, each one designed to inflict maximum casualties on any attacking force. Marcus took command of the main line, positioning himself at the center where he could see the entire battlefield. Kaya would lead a mobile strike force, a group of their best fighters who would harass the enemy's flanks in rear, preventing them from concentrating their strength. It was a desperate plan, built on hope and desperation and the thin thread of shared purpose. But it was also the only plan they had. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and orange, Marcus saw them. A long column of riders emerging from the tree line at the far end of the valley. 40 men, maybe more, armed with rifles and pistols and the confidence of overwhelming force. At the head of the column, unmistakable in his black coat and wide-brimmed hat, rode Silas Blackwood. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest, but his hands were steady on his rifle. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made to himself after her death. He thought about Kaya, about the suffering she had endured and the strength she had shown. He thought about all the people who had come to this valley seeking hope, seeking justice, seeking a chance to stand against evil. And he realized that whatever happened next, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The riders drew closer, their horses kicking up plumes of snow, their faces grim and determined. When they were within earshot, Blackwood raised his hand and the column halted. For a long moment, no one moved. The two forces faced each other across the snow-covered field, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Blackwood's voice rang out cold and clear in the gathering darkness. "Marcus Cole, I know you can hear me. You have one chance to end this peacefully. Send out the Apache woman, and I will let the rest of you live. Refuse, and I will burn this entire valley to the ground." Marcus raised his own voice loud enough to carry across the field. "You know my answer, Blackwood. You knew it before you rode into this valley. The woman stays, and you can go straight to hell." Blackwood's laugh was harsh and humorless. "So be it. Kill them all." The first shot rang out and the battle for Hunter Creek Valley began. What followed was chaos. Blackwood's men charged forward expecting easy resistance and were met with a hail of gunfire from Marcus's defensive line. The narrow approach worked exactly as planned, funneling the attackers into a killing zone where the defenders could concentrate their fire. Men fell screaming from their horses. Animals reared and bolted, throwing their riders into the snow. The orderly charge dissolved into a confused melee, and for a few precious minutes the defenders held their ground. But Blackwood's men were professionals, hardened by years of violence and bloodshed. They regrouped quickly, finding cover and returning fire. The battle became a grinding exchange of bullets, each side trying to find weakness in the other's position. And then Kaya struck. She came out of the darkness like a vengeful spirit, her massive form moving with impossible speed and grace. She hit the enemy's flank like a thunderbolt, scattering men and horses, her blade flashing in the moonlight. Men who had been confident in their overwhelming numbers suddenly found themselves facing something they could not understand: a warrior who moved like smoke and struck like lightning. Marcus watched from his position, marveling at her ferocity. She was beautiful and terrible, a force of nature unleashed against the men who had hurt her and so many others. And she was winning. But victory was not certain. For every man Kaya cut down, two more took his place. For every attack the defenders repelled, another came from a different direction. The battle raged back and forth across the valley, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. And then Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Blackwood himself, hanging back from the main fighting, had spotted Kaya, and he was raising a rifle, taking aim at her exposed back. Without thinking, Marcus leaped from his position and sprinted across the battlefield. He did not know if he could reach her in time. He did not know if he could stop the bullet that was about to end her life. He only knew that he had to try one. Kay, she turned at the sound of his voice, her golden eyes finding his across the chaos of battle. She saw the danger, saw Blackwood's rifle swinging toward her, and tried to move. But she was too slow. The shot rang out and Marcus threw himself into its path. The bullet caught him in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him to the snow. Pain exploded through his body, white hot and all-consuming, and the world went dark around the edges. The last thing he heard before consciousness faded was Kaya's voice screaming his name. Marcus, and then there was nothing but silence. The world came back in fragments. Pain first, a searing agony that radiated from his chest and spread through every nerve in his body. Then a sound distant and muffled, like voices heard through water. Finally, light, a flickering orange glow that danced across his closed eyelids. Marcus opened his eyes and found himself staring at the ceiling of his own cabin. He tried to move and the pain nearly drove him back into unconsciousness. His chest was wrapped in bandages, thick layers of cloth that were already stained with blood. Every breath felt like fire, every heartbeat a hammer blow against his shattered ribs. Do not move. Kaya's voice cut through the fog of pain, and he turned his head to find her kneeling beside his bed. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, her clothing torn and singed, but her golden eyes were bright with something he had never seen in them before. Tears. The battle, Marcus managed, his voice barely a whisper. What happened? We won. The words seemed impossible. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, facing an army of professional killers. How could they have won? Kaya seemed to read the question in his eyes. When you fell, something changed. The men who had come to fight with us, they saw what you did. They saw you throw yourself in front of a bullet meant for me. And they fought harder. Harder than I have ever seen anyone fight. She paused, her hand reaching out to touch his face, her fingers surprisingly gentle. And I fought harder too. When I saw you fall, I thought you were dead. I thought I had lost you. And something inside me broke. I do not remember everything that happened after that. I only remember the blood and the screaming and the bodies falling around me like leaves in autumn. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process what she was telling him. Blackwood dead. I killed him myself. I tore his throat out with my bare hands and watched him drown in his own blood. He died knowing that he had failed, that everything he had built was crumbling around him. He died afraid. There was no satisfaction in her voice, only weariness. The killing had been necessary, but it had cost her something. Marcus understood. He had felt the same way after his first battle, when the excitement of victory had faded and left only the hollow awareness of what violence truly meant. How long have I been unconscious? 3 days. She paused, her golden eyes searching his face. I thought you were going to die. The bullet passed through your chest and out your back. It missed your heart by less than an inch. The doctor in Red Valley said it was a miracle you survived. Marcus managed a weak smile. I have always been stubborn. Yes, you have. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of intimacy that spoke louder than any words. Her skin was warm, her breath soft against his face, and despite the pain that racked his body, Marcus felt something bloom in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the wound. I thought I had lost you, Kaya whispered. I have lost so many people in my life. My family, my tribe, everyone I have ever loved. I thought I had learned to live with loss, to accept it as the price of survival. But when you fell, when I saw the blood spreading across your chest, I realized that I could not lose you. Not you. Marcus raised his hand, ignoring the pain, and touched her face. You did not lose me. I am still here. Yes, you are. She pulled back slightly, and Marcus saw that her tears had dried. In their place was something else, something fierce and determined and unbreakable. When you are healed, we need to talk. About what happens next. About what we are to each other. I think we both know what we are to each other. Perhaps. But I want to hear you say it. Marcus looked into her golden eyes, and in that moment, all the walls he had built around his heart came crashing down. I love you, Kaya. I do not know when it happened or how. But somewhere between the first night you spent in my stable and the moment I threw myself in front of that bullet, I fell in love with you. And I do not care that you are Apache and I am white. I do not care that you are 7 feet tall and I am barely 6. I do not care what anyone else thinks or says. I love you and I want to spend whatever time I have left on this earth by your side. Kaya was silent for a long moment. Then slowly a smile spread across her face. Not the cold, predatory smile he had seen when she was fighting. A real smile, warm and open and full of wonder. I love you too, Marcus Cole. I have loved you since the night you told me about Sarah, since you showed me that not all white men are monsters. I tried to fight it. I told myself that it was weakness, that love was a vulnerability I could not afford. But I was wrong. Love is not weakness. Love is strength. And loving you has made me stronger than I ever thought possible. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and gentle, mindful of his injuries, but no less passionate for their tenderness. It was their first real kiss, the first kiss that acknowledged what they had become to each other, and Marcus felt it all the way down to his soul. When she pulled back, her golden eyes were shining. Rest now, you need to heal. We have a lifetime ahead of us, and I intend to spend every moment of it with you. Marcus smiled and closed his eyes, letting the exhaustion finally claim him. The pain was still there, and the road to recovery would be long and difficult. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt at peace. He was not alone anymore. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and recovery, of small victories and frustrating setbacks. Marcus's body healed slowly, the wound in his chest closing gradually under Kaya's careful attention. She changed his bandages, fed him when he was too weak to feed himself, and sat with him through the long nights when the pain made sleep impossible. She also told him stories. Stories of her childhood, of growing up in a tribe that valued strength and courage above all else. Stories of her grandmother, the medicine woman who had taught her to dance and fight and see the world as a web of interconnected spirits. Stories of her family lost to the cruelty of a world that saw them as less than human. My father was a war chief, she said one night, as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. He was the bravest man I ever knew. He fought against the soldiers who came to take our land, led raids that became legends among our people. But in the end, there were too many of them. They caught him alone, far from the tribe, and they shot him like a dog. What happened to your mother? She was taken to a reservation after my father's death. They called it protection, but it was really a prison. She could not leave, could not hunt, could not live as she had always lived. Within a year, she had caught the white man's sickness. She died coughing blood, surrounded by strangers who did not speak her language. And your brother scattered. The youngest was taken by a missionary school where they cut his hair and beat him for speaking our language. The others fled into the mountains, and I do not know if they survived. I have not seen any of them since I was 12 years old. Marcus reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength that lay coiled beneath her skin. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. Be angry. Anger is what keeps us alive. Anger is what drives us to fight against injustice, to refuse to accept the world as it is. Without anger, we would be nothing but victims. Is that why you kept fighting? Even after everything that was done to you? Yeah. And no, I kept fighting because I did not know how to do anything else. Fighting was all I had left. But now, she paused, her golden eyes meeting his. Now I have something else. Someone else. And I am beginning to think that maybe fighting is not the only way to survive. Marcus squeezed her hand. Maybe we can find a different way together. Maybe we can. As the days passed and Marcus grew stronger, word of their victory spread throughout the territory. The battle for Hunter Creek Valley became a legend, a story told in saloons and trading posts and around campfires from Colorado to California. The giant Apache woman and her white companion who had stood against an army and won. The ones who had destroyed the Silas Blackwood and freed dozens of captive women. The ones who had proven that evil could be defeated if only people had the courage to stand against it. People began to arrive in the valley drawn by the legend and the hope it represented. Some were refugees women who had escaped from slavery and were looking for a safe place to rebuild their lives. Others were fighters, men and women, who wanted to continue the work that Marcus and Kaya had started to hunt down the remaining traffickers and bring them to justice. And some were simply curious, wanting to see for themselves the heroes that everyone was talking about. Jenkins arrived one morning with a delegation from Red Valley, a group of town elders who had come to offer their gratitude and support. "What you did here has changed everything," the old preacher said, his weathered face glowing with pride. "Blackwood's organization is in ruins. His buyers have fled. His men have scattered to the four winds. For the first time in 15 years, the native women of this territory can sleep without fear." "There is still work to be done," Marcus replied. Blackwood was not the only trafficker. There are others, maybe not as powerful, but just as evil. "Yes, but you have shown us that they can be stopped. You have given us hope." Kaya stood beside Marcus, her massive form casting a shadow over the assembled elders. "Hope is not enough. We need organization, training, resources. If we are going to finish what we started, we need to build something that will last beyond us." Jenkins nodded slowly. "We have been thinking along similar lines. The people of Red Valley want to establish a formal alliance, a network of communities dedicated to fighting the slave trade. We want you to lead it." Marcus and Kaya exchanged a glance. They had not asked for leadership. They had not wanted to become symbols of anything. But sometimes fate had other plans. "We will consider it," Marcus said finally. "Give us time to discuss." The elders departed, leaving Marcus and Kaya alone in the cabin. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "What do you think?" Marcus asked finally. Kaya walked to the window and stared out at the valley, at the mountains rising in the distance. "I think that we have been given an opportunity, a chance to do something that matters, something that will outlast us." She paused, her golden eyes thoughtful. "I also think that it will be dangerous, that there will be more battles, more bloodshed, more loss. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus rose from his chair, wincing at the pain in his chest, but refusing to let it stop him. He crossed to where she stood and placed his hand on her shoulder. "I was prepared to die for you. I am certainly prepared to live for something bigger than myself." She turned to face him, and what he saw in her eyes took his breath away. "Love, yes, but also respect, admiration, trust. Then we will do this together. We will build something that will change the world." The alliance was formally established 6 weeks later in a ceremony held in the center of Red Valley. Representatives from a dozen communities came together to sign a charter, pledging their resources and their lives to the fight against human trafficking. They called it the Hunter Creek Compact in honor of the valley where the resistance had begun. Marcus and Kaya were named as the leaders of the military arm of the alliance, responsible for planning and executing operations against traffickers throughout the territory. It was a role that suited them both, combining Marcus's tactical expertise with Kaya's combat skills and intimate knowledge of how the traffickers operated. Their first major operation came 2 months after the establishment of the compact. Intelligence had reached them of a large shipment of captive women being transported through the territory bound for a buyer in California. The shipment was guarded by 24 armed men, and it would pass through a narrow canyon about 50 miles east of Hunter Creek Valley. Marcus planned the ambush with meticulous care, positioning fighters at both ends of the canyon and on the ridges above. The goal was to trap the convoy, force them to surrender, and free the captives without unnecessary bloodshed. But he also prepared for the worst, knowing that men who trafficked in human flesh rarely gave up without a fight. They struck at dawn when the convoy was deep in the canyon and the morning light was just beginning to touch the ridgetops. The first shots came from above, carefully aimed to wound horses and disable wagons rather than kill men. The convoy ground to a halt, the guards scrambling for cover and returning fire blindly into the rocks above. Then Kaya appeared. She descended from the ridge like a vengeful draw, her massive form silhouetted against the rising sun. She carried no weapon except her knife, but she did not need one. She was a weapon, every inch of her trained and honed for exactly this kind of work. The guards who saw her panicked. Some fled, abandoning their posts and their comrades. Others stood their ground and were cut down in seconds, their bullets missing her impossibly fast, formed their fists and knives useless against her strength. Within minutes, the battle was over. Marcus rode into the canyon to find Kaya standing among the fallen guards, her copper skin gleaming with sweat, her golden eyes bright with the fierce joy of victory. Around her, the fighters of the compact were already moving among the wagons, breaking locks and helping the captives out into the light. There were 19 women in the shipment, 19 human beings who had been stolen from their homes, their families, their lives, and were being transported like cattle to a fate worse than death. Some of them wept when they realized they were free. Others stood in stunned silence, unable to believe that their nightmare was finally over. One of them, a young girl who could not have been more than 15, approached Kaya with trembling steps. "Are you the one they call the giant Apache?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kaya knelt so that she was at the girl's eye level, her fierce expression softening. "I am. Is it true what they say? That you cannot be killed?" Kaya smiled gently. "No, I can be killed. I am just very hard to catch." The girl stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and touched Kaya's face as if confirming that she was real. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." Kaya's golden eyes glistened. "You saved yourselves by surviving. I just helped you get free." They brought the rescued women back to Hunter Creek Valley, where the Alliance had established a network of safe houses and support services. The women would be cared for, healed, and eventually helped to return to their homes or start new lives in the territory. It was good work, important work, and Marcus and Kaya threw themselves into it with a dedication that surprised even themselves. But there was a moment. Every operation carried risks. Every battle left scars both visible and invisible. And as the months passed, the weight of leadership began to take its toll. Marcus found himself lying awake at night, haunted by the faces of the men he had killed, the women he had failed to save, the decisions that had led to the deaths of fighters under his command. He had known violence before in the cavalry, but this was different. This was personal. These were people who had trusted him, followed him, died for a cause he had asked them to believe in. Kaya carried her own burdens. She had become a symbol, a legend, and the expectations that came with that status were crushing. People looked to her for hope, for strength, for the certainty that good would triumph over evil. But she was not certain. She was tired and wounded and increasingly aware of her own limitations. One night after a particularly difficult day, they sat together on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Sometimes I wonder if we are making a difference," Marcus said quietly. "For every trafficker we stop, 2 more take his place. For every woman we save, a dozen more are captured. It feels like we are trying to empty the ocean with a bucket." Kaya was silent for a long moment. "When I was a child," she said finally, "my grandmother told me a story about a great warrior who spent his entire life fighting against an enemy that could never be defeated. He won every battle, killed every foe, but the enemy always returned. Finally, exhausted and broken, he asked his grandmother why he should continue fighting when victory was impossible. What did she tell him?" Aya turned to look at him, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. "She told him that victory was not the point. The fight itself was the point. That by standing against evil, even when we cannot defeat it, we keep the light alive. We show others that resistance is possible, that surrender is not inevitable. We give people hope. And is that enough hope? It has to be. Because without hope, there is nothing." Marcus reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, the strength that lay beneath it. "Then we keep fighting. Yes, we keep fighting." They sat together in silence, 2 wounded souls who had found each other in the darkness, holding on to hope in a world that often seemed determined to crush it. Spring came to Hunter Creek Valley, melting the snow and turning the fields green with new growth. Marcus's wound had healed completely now, leaving only a scar on his chest, a permanent reminder of the night he had almost died. He stood on the porch of the cabin, watching Kaya work in the garden she had planted behind the house. It was a strange sight, this giant warrior woman kneeling in the dirt, her massive hands gentle, as she tended the seedlings she had coaxed from the earth. But it was also beautiful, a reminder that strength and tenderness were not opposites, that the same hands that could crush a man's skull could also nurture life. She looked up and caught him, watching a smile spreading across her face. Are you going to stand there all day? Or are you going to help? Marcus grinned and walked down from the porch, kneeling beside her in the soft earth. What do you need me to do? These beans need to be staked. The vines are growing faster than I expected. They worked together in companionable silence, the sun warm on their backs, the scent of fresh earth filling their lungs. It was peaceful, domestic, utterly ordinary. And yet Marcus could not shake the feeling that something was about to change. The feeling was confirmed an hour later when a rider came galloping into the valley. It was one of their scouts, a young man named Thomas, who had been watching the eastern approaches to the territory. News from Colorado, he gasped, barely able to stay in the saddle. A man named Vincent Harrow has taken over Blackwood's operations. He is bigger, better organized, and he is coming this way. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. How big? Thomas swallowed hard. He has over 100 men, professional soldiers, most of them veterans of the war. And he has made it clear that his first order of business is destroying the Hunter Creek Compact. Koya rose from the garden, her golden eyes going hard. When within the month, maybe sooner, he is already moving his forces into position. Marcus and Kaya exchanged a look. They had known this day would come. Blackwood's death had created a power vacuum, and sooner or later someone would step in to fill it. They had hoped for more time, more resources, more fighters. But fate rarely granted such wishes. Call the council, Marcus said. We need to start planning immediately. Thomas nodded and rode off, leaving Marcus and Kaya standing in the garden, their peaceful morning shattered by the reality of war. It seems our rest is over, Kaya said quietly. It seems so. She turned to face him, and in her golden eyes he saw the same determination that had burned there on the night they first met. Are you ready? Marcus thought about the question. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made to himself after her death. He thought about Kaya, about the love they had built, and the life they were beginning to create together. He thought about all the people who were depending on them, all the women they had saved, and all the ones who were still waiting to be freed. And he made his choice. I am ready. Kaya nodded and took his hand. Then let us go to war. The council met that evening in the main hall of the compound they had built near the cabin. Representatives from every community in the alliance gathered around the large oak table, their faces grim, as Thomas repeated the intelligence he had gathered. Vincent Harrow was not like Silas Blackwood. Where Blackwood had been a businessman, Harrow was a warrior. He had served as a colonel in the Confederate Army during the war, commanding a regiment that had become notorious for its brutality. After the surrender at Appomattox, he had refused to accept defeat, leading his men west in building a criminal empire based on violence and intimidation. He had absorbed what remained of Blackwood's organization within weeks of the old trafficker's death, using a combination of bribes and murder to eliminate anyone who opposed him. Now he controlled a network that stretched from Texas to California, trafficking not just women but also weapons, stolen goods, and anything else that could turn a profit. And he had made it very destroy the Hunter Creek Compact. Why, one of the council members asked. We are no threat to him. Our operations are small, limited to this territory. Marcus shook his head. It is not about the threat we pose now. It is about what we represent. We have shown that resistance is possible, that the traffickers can be defeated. As long as we exist, we are a symbol that others might follow. Harrow cannot allow that. So what do? Another member asked. We cannot fight 100 soldiers. We barely survived against Blackwood's 40. Kaya spoke for the first time, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of absolute conviction. We do not fight them in the open. We fight them the way my people have always fought. We use the land. We use our knowledge. We use every advantage we have and deny them every advantage they expect. Guerrilla warfare, Marcus added. We harass them, delay them, bleed them until they are weak enough to defeat. And if that does not work, Jenkins asked quietly, then we die fighting, but we take as many of them with us as we can. The council debated through the night, weighing options and making plans. By dawn, they had agreed on a strategy. They would not try to hold the valley against a direct assault. Instead, they would evacuate the civilian population to safe locations in the mountains, leaving only fighters behind. Then they would wage a campaign of attrition, striking at Harrow's supply lines and outposts, forcing him to spread his forces thin, waiting for the opportunity to deliver a decisive blow. It was a desperate strategy born of necessity rather than choice. but it was also the only strategy that gave them a chance. Over the next 2 weeks, the valley was transformed. Women, children, and the elderly were moved to hidden camps in the mountains protected by small groups of fighters. Supplies were cached in secret locations throughout the territory, and the remaining fighters, numbering just over 50 now, were organized into strike teams designed for hit-and-run operations. Marcus and Kaya led the largest of these teams, a group of 15 experienced fighters who would serve as the tip of the spear. They trained constantly, honing their skills and learning to work together as a unit. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense, but they were something potentially more dangerous. They were believers fighting for a cause they were willing to die for. On the 15th day after Thomas's warning, Harrow's forces crossed into the territory. They came like an army, organized and disciplined, spreading out across the landscape in a pattern designed to sweep up any resistance. At their head rode Vincent Harrow himself, a tall man with silver hair and cold gray eyes, his bearing carrying the confidence of someone who had never been defeated. Marcus watched from a ridge overlooking the main approach to the valley, counting the soldiers as they passed below. 112, he reported quietly, plus supply wagons, horses, and what looks like a small cannon. Kaya knelt beside him, her golden eyes tracking the enemy's movements. They expect to crush us with overwhelming force. They do not understand what they are walking into. Let us show them. The first ambush came that evening as Harrow's forces were making camp for the night. A supply wagon separated slightly from the main column was attacked by a team of 8 fighters who appeared out of the darkness, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before the guards could respond. The wagon was burned, its contents destroyed, and 3 of Harrow's men were killed. The second ambush came the following morning, targeting a patrol that had been sent to scout the approaches to the valley. All 6 members of the patrol were killed, their bodies left as a warning to those who would follow. The third ambush came that afternoon, and the fourth that night, and the fifth the morning after. By the end of the third day, Harrow had lost 23 men and was no closer to engaging the main body of the resistance than he had been when he crossed the border. His response was exactly what Marcus had predicted. They are spreading out. Thomas reported having observed the enemy's movements from a concealed position, sending smaller patrols to cover more ground. They think they can flush us out. Marcus smiled grimly. Good. Smaller patrols are easier to destroy. The campaign of attrition continued for 2 more weeks. Harrow's forces, frustrated by their inability to find and engage the enemy, became increasingly careless. Patrols wandered too far from support. Guards fell asleep at their posts. Supply lines stretched thin and vulnerable. And the fighters of the compact struck again and again, appearing out of nowhere, killing and burning, then disappearing before retaliation was possible. But Harrow was not a fool. He learned from his mistakes. He began concentrating his forces, moving more slowly, protecting his supply lines with overwhelming numbers. The easy targets disappeared and the ambushes became more difficult, more costly. We are losing momentum, Kaya observed one evening as they reviewed the day's reports. He is adapting, I know. We need to change our approach. How Marcus stared at the map spread out before them, tracing the lines of Harrow's advance with his finger. We have been reacting to him, letting him dictate the pace of the fight. We need to take the initiative, force him to react to us. What do you have in mind? Marcus looked up at her, a dangerous glint in his eyes. I think it is time to cut off the head of the snake. The plan was audacious, borderline suicidal. They would infiltrate Harrow's main camp, penetrate his defenses, and assassinate him in his own tent. Without their leader, the enemy forces would fall into confusion, possibly even turn on each other. The war could be ended in a single night. The risks were enormous. Harrow's camp was heavily guarded, and any infiltration would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and more than a little luck. If they were caught, they would be killed, and the alliance would lose its 2 most important leaders. But the alternative was a slow war of attrition that they could not win. Harrow had more men, more resources, more time. Eventually, he would grind them down and destroy them. The only way to prevent that was to end the war quickly, decisively. I will go alone, Kaya said when Marcus outlined the plan to her. You are too valuable to risk. Marcus shook his head. We go together or we do not go at all. I will not let you face this alone. They argued about it for hours, but in the end, Kaya relented. They would go together, supported by a small team of their best fighters, who would create a distraction while they penetrated the camp. The night they chose was moonless and cold, perfect for the kind of work they intended to do. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, avoiding patrols and sentries, working their way steadily toward the heart of Harrow's encampment. The distraction came right on schedule, a sudden explosion at the edge of the camp that drew guards and soldiers rushing toward the perimeter. In the confusion, Marcus and Kaya slipped through a gap in the defenses and made their way toward the large tent at the center of the camp, the tent where Vincent Harrow slept. They were within 50 yards of the tent when everything went wrong. A guard stumbled out of the shadows, nearly colliding with Kaya. She killed him instantly, her hand clamping over his mouth and her knife sliding between his ribs, but he managed to cry out before he died. The sound was not loud, but it was enough. Lights flared throughout the camp. Voices shouted. Footsteps pounded toward their position. "Go!" Marcus hissed. "I will hold them off." Kaya hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded and sprinted toward Harrow's tent. Marcus turned to face the oncoming guards, his rifle raised, his heart pounding. The first shot dropped a man at 30 yards. The second and third took down two more. Then they were on him, too close for the rifle, and he drew his knife and fought with a desperation born of love and duty and the absolute knowledge that Kaya's survival depended on him buying her time. He killed two more before a blow to the head sent him sprawling to the ground. He tried to rise, but a boot connected with his ribs, and then another and another. Pain exploded through his body, and the world began to fade. The last thing he heard was a scream from the direction of Harrow's tent. Kaya's scream, a scream of rage and triumph, and something else he could not identify. Then darkness claimed him. He woke in a cage. The bars were thick iron, too strong to bend even for Kaya. Not that she could have helped him. She was in a cage of her own, 10 feet away, her golden eyes blazing with fury as she tested the limits of her prison. Marcus tried to sit up, but his body protested violently. Everything hurt. His ribs, his head, his arms, his legs. He was fairly certain that several bones were broken, and the blood crusted on his face suggested that his head wound was serious. "Welcome back." The voice came from outside the cages, and Marcus turned his head to see Vincent Harrow standing there, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight, his gray eyes cold and calculating. "You gave us quite a bit of trouble," Harrow continued. "Killed a lot of my men. Cost me a lot of money. I have to admit I am impressed." Marcus said nothing. There was nothing to say. Harrow walked slowly around the cages, studying his prisoners like specimens in a museum. The famous giant Apache. He stopped in front of Kaya's cage, his lips curling into a smile. "You know, I was hoping to capture you alive. You are worth a fortune on the open market. There are men who would pay thousands of dollars for a creature like you." Kaya's response was to spit at him through the bars. The glob of saliva hit his cheek, and for a moment his composure cracked. His hands shot out and grabbed her through the bars, his fingers closing around her throat. "I could kill you right now," he hissed. "Snap your neck and be done with it. But that would be too easy, too merciful. You took something from me when you killed Blackwood. He was a business partner, a valuable asset. You cost me money, and I intend to collect every penny." He released her and stepped back, composing himself. "I am going to sell you both. The woman to the highest bidder, probably some degenerate rancher who wants a giant freak to breed. And you," he turned to Marcus, "I have something special in mind for you. There is a man in Mexico who runs fighting pits, matches his slaves against each other for the entertainment of wealthy patrons. He pays well for white men, says they last longer than the natives." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "You will never break us." Harrow laughed, a cold sound without humor. "Everyone breaks eventually. It is just a matter of finding the right pressure point." He turned and walked away, leaving them alone in their cages, surrounded by guards who watched them with cold, pitiless eyes. Marcus looked at Kaya, saw the rage and desperation in her golden eyes. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I failed you. You did not fail me. You fought to give me time. That is not failure. That is love. I should have been faster, stronger, better." Kaya shook her head. "You are exactly what I need you to be, and we are not dead yet." Marcus managed a weak smile. "No, we are not." They settled into silence, conserving their strength, waiting for an opportunity that might never come. Outside the cage, the enemy camp hummed with activity, soldiers going about their business, unaware that within those iron bars, two wounded warriors were already planning their escape. The opportunity came 3 nights later. A group of new prisoners had been brought into the camp, a dozen women captured during a raid on a village to the east. They were herded past the cages where Marcus and Kaya were held, their faces blank with shock and terror, their eyes seeing nothing. Among them was a face Marcus recognized, a young woman named Elena, who had been one of the first women they had freed from Blackwood's operations. She had stayed in Hunter Creek Valley working in the safe houses helping other survivors heal. And now she was here, captured again. Her hope turned to ashes. But as she passed Marcus's cage, her eyes flicked toward him for just a moment. And in that moment, he saw something that made his heart leap. Recognition, purpose, determination. Elena was not broken. She was playing a role, waiting for her chance, and she was here on purpose. Marcus did not react, did not give any sign that he had seen her. But inside, hope began to kindle. The night deepened and the camp grew quiet. Most of the soldiers had retired to their tents, leaving only a skeleton crew of guards to watch the prisoners. Marcus waited, counting the minutes, wondering if Elena's presence meant what he thought it meant. His answer came just before dawn. A sudden commotion at the edge of the camp. Shouts, gunfire, the sounds of chaos. The guards near the cages looked around in confusion, then ran toward the disturbance, leaving the prisoners momentarily unattended. Elena appeared out of the shadows, a ring of keys in her hand. Quickly she whispered, unlocking Kaya's cage first, then Marcus's. Jenkins sent me. The Alliance is here. 100 fighters attacking from 3 directions. Kaya was out of her cage in an instant, her massive form unfolding like a predator released from captivity. Where is Harrow? His tent at the center of the camp. But he has guards. Many guards. Then we will have to be fast. Marcus stumbled out of his cage, his body protesting every movement. He was in no condition to fight, but he had no intention of staying behind. Let us go. They moved through the chaos of the camp, dodging soldiers who were too focused on the attacking force to notice 3 prisoners slipping through the darkness. The sounds of battle grew louder as they approached the center, by the clash of steel and the crack of gunfire filling the night air. Harrow's tent was ahead, lit from within by lanterns. Guards surrounded it, a dozen men armed with rifles and pistols, alert and ready. Kaya did not hesitate. She charged. The guards saw her coming, but they had never faced anything like her. She hit them like a thunderbolt, her hands moving with blinding speed, her strength overwhelming. Men flew through the air, bones shattered, screams cut short. In less than a minute, the guards were down, and the way to Harrow was clear. Kaya pushed through the tent flap, Marcus and Elena right behind her. Vincent Harrow stood at the far end of the tent, a pistol in his hand, his silver hair disheveled and his gray eyes wild with fury. You, he snarled, raising the pistol toward Kaya. You should be in a cage, and you should be dead. She crossed the distance between them in 2 strides faster than he could react, and her hand closed around his gun, hand crushing the bones with a single squeeze. He screamed, the pistol falling from his grip, and she lifted him off the ground like a child. This is for every woman you ever stole, she said, her voice cold as ice. This is for every life you destroyed. This is for every moment of pain and terror and despair. She looked into his eyes, and he saw his death there. And this is for Marcus, for daring to threaten the man I love. She killed him quickly, more mercy than he deserved. His body crumpled to the ground, and the war was over. The battle ended with the dawn. Harrow's forces, leaderless and demoralized, surrendered in droves as word spread of their commander's death. Those who refused to lay down their arms were cut down by the Alliance fighters who had come to rescue their leaders. By the time the sun had fully risen over the mountains, the camp was secured and the war was truly over. Marcus sat on a wooden crate outside Harrow's tent, his battered body finally giving in to the exhaustion he had been fighting for days. Every breath sent pain lancing through his cracked ribs. Every movement reminded him of the beating he had endured in captivity. But he was alive, and Kaya was alive, and the enemy who had threatened everything they had built lay dead on the ground. Kaya emerged from the tent, her copper skin splattered with blood that was not her own, her golden eyes still blazing with the fire of combat. She crossed to where Marcus sat and knelt before him, her massive hands incredibly gentle as she examined his injuries. You need a doctor. I need you. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest and completely without defense. Kaya's hands stilled on his face and something shifted in her expression. The warrior faded, replaced by the woman underneath, the woman who had been hurt so many times and had built walls so high that even she had forgotten what lay behind them. "You have me," she said quietly. "You have always had me." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his forehead, a gesture of tenderness that seemed almost impossible from someone so powerful. Marcus closed his eyes and let himself lean into her touch, let himself feel safe for the first time in what seemed like forever. Around them, the Alliance fighters were securing prisoners and gathering supplies, but no one disturbed the two figures sitting together in the morning light. They had earned this moment. They had paid for it in blood and pain and sacrifice. Jenkins appeared an hour later, his weathered face creased with worry as he surveyed the aftermath of the battle. 47 enemy dead, he reported. Another 63 captured. We lost 12 fighters with another 20 wounded. He paused, his eyes moving from Marcus to Kaya. "But you are both alive. That is what matters most." Marcus managed a weak smile. "I seem to make a habit of almost dying. Perhaps you should find a less dangerous hobby." I have been telling him the same thing, Kaya said, a hint of humor breaking through her exhaustion. "He does not listen." Jenkins chuckled, then sobered. "What do we do with the prisoners?" That question had been weighing on Marcus's mind since the fighting ended. In the heat of battle, the answer was simple: kill or be killed. But now, with dozens of defeated men sitting in chains, the calculus was different. The ones who were just soldiers following orders, we give them a choice: leave the territory and never return, or face justice for their crimes. Marcus paused, thinking. The ones who were directly involved in trafficking, the ones who hurt the women, they stand trial. We let the people they victimized decide their fate. And if the verdict is death, then they die. But it will be justice, not revenge. There is a difference. Kaya nodded slowly, her golden eyes thoughtful. My people had similar traditions. When someone wronged the tribe, they were judged by those they had wronged. It was believed that only the victims could truly understand the weight of the crime. Then that is how we will do it. The trials began 3 days later after Marcus had been treated by the Alliance's doctors and declared stable enough to travel. They were held in Red Valley, in the same church where Jenkins had preached against Blackwood for so many years. The irony was not lost on anyone. The accused were brought before a tribunal made up of women who had been freed from trafficking operations over the past year. They listened as evidence was presented, as witnesses testified, as the full horror of what these men had done was laid bare for all to see. Some of the accused showed remorse. They wept and begged for mercy, claiming they had been coerced or desperate, or simply too weak to resist. The tribunal listened to their pleas and in some cases showed the mercy they asked for. Prison sentences, exile, community service in the communities they had helped to destroy. But others showed no remorse at all. They sneered at their accusers, mocked the proceedings, boasted of the things they had done. For them, the tribunal had no mercy. They were sentenced to death and executed by firing squad at dawn the following morning. It was brutal justice, but it was justice nonetheless. And when it was over, the territory breathed a collective sigh of relief. The traffickers were gone. The system that had enabled them was dismantled. For the first time in years, the native women of the region could live without constant fear. Marcus watched the last execution from a distance, his feelings complicated by the violence he had witnessed and participated in over the past months. He had killed men in battle, watched Kaya tear through enemies like a force of nature, ordered operations that had resulted in deaths on both sides. He had told himself it was necessary, that the cause justified the cost. But now, watching condemned men fall before a firing squad, he wondered if that was really true. Kaya found him standing alone on the hill overlooking the execution ground, his face troubled. "You are thinking too much. Is that possible for you?" "Yes." She came to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. These men chose their path. They had opportunities to turn away, to choose differently, and they refused. What happened to them is the consequence of their own choices, not yours, I know. But it does not make it easier to watch. It should not be easy. If killing became easy, we would be no different from them. Marcus turned to look at her, struck, as always, by her wisdom. She had suffered more than anyone he had ever known, endured horrors that would have broken most people, and yet she had emerged with her humanity intact. Her capacity for violence was matched only by her capacity for compassion. She was a paradox, a contradiction, and he loved her more than he had ever thought possible. "How do you do it?" he asked. How do you carry all of this and still remain yourself? Kaya was silent for a long moment, considering the question. I remember who I am fighting for, she said finally. Not the abstract idea of justice, but the specific people whose lives have been destroyed. Every woman we freed. Every child who will grow up without fear because of what we did. When I start to lose myself in the darkness, I think of them and I find my way back to the light. Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. I think that is why I love you, he said quietly. You remind me of who I want to be. Kaya turned to face him fully, her golden eyes soft in a way he rarely saw. And you remind me that I am capable of being loved, that despite everything that was done to me, I am still worthy of someone's heart. They stood together on the hill watching the sun set over the valley, two wounded souls who had found healing in each other's presence. Below them, the town of Red Valley was coming to life with the sounds of celebration music and laughter drifting up through the evening air. The, the future was uncertain, but full of possibility. I want to build something with you, Marcus said. Not just an alliance or a movement. A life, a home, a family. Kaya's breath caught, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. A family if you want one. I know it is not something you ever expected given everything that has happened, but I want you to know that it is what I want. You are what I want. Whatever form that takes, whatever you are willing to give me, I will accept with gratitude. She was quiet for so long that Marcus began to fear he had overstepped, had asked for too much too soon. But then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. Among my people, when a warrior chooses a mate, they do not speak of love the way your people do. They speak of walking the same path, of facing the same direction, of fighting side by side until death separates them. She looked up at him, and in her golden eyes he saw his entire future. I choose to walk your path, Marcus Cole. I choose to face whatever comes with you beside me. And if that means building a family, creating new life from the love we have found, then yes, I want that too. Marcus felt something break open in his chest, something that had been closed and guarded since Sarah's death. Tears stung his eyes and he did not try to hide them. Then we will build it together, starting now. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as his injured body would allow, feeling her warmth and strength surrounding him like a shelter against all the pain of the world. She held him back just as fiercely, and in that moment on that hill overlooking the valley, where they had fought and bled and nearly died, they made a silent vow to each other. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The wedding was held 6 weeks later on the first day of true spring. Jenkins performed the ceremony in the little church in Red Valley, the same church where the trials had been held, where so much pain had been witnessed and judged. It seemed fitting that it should also be a place of joy, that the building which had seen the end of so much suffering should also witness the beginning of something new. The guest list was eclectic, to say the least. Alliance fighters stood shoulder to shoulder with townspeople. Former captives mingled with ranchers and miners who had joined the cause. There were Apache from nearby reservations come to witness one of their own find happiness with a white man. There were former enemies who had renounced their past and were trying to build new lives. There were people of every background and belief united by the common thread of having been touched by the events of the past year. And at the center of it all stood Marcus and Kaya. She wore a dress she had made herself, combining elements of Apache tradition with Western fashion in a way that was entirely her own. Beads and shells adorned the bodice, catching the light with every movement. The skirt was long and flowing, designed to accommodate her enormous height without sacrificing elegance. Her black hair was loose around her shoulders, crowned with a wreath of wildflowers that Jenkins's wife had woven for her. Marcus had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. He stood at the altar, watching her walk toward him down the aisle, and felt his heart swell with an emotion too large for words. She moved with the grace of a warrior, but there was something softer in her bearing today, something almost shy. She was nervous, he realized. This woman who had faced armies without flinching was nervous about standing before a crowd and pledging her heart. The realization made him love her even more. Jenkins began the ceremony with a prayer, then launched into a sermon about the nature of love and commitment. Marcus barely heard the words. He was too focused on Kaya, on the way the light played across her copper skin, on the golden warmth of her eyes as they held his gaze. When the time came for vows, Marcus spoke first. I have loved two women in my life. The first taught me that love could be gentle and kind, that it could make even the darkest days bearable. When I lost her, I thought that part of me had died forever. He paused, feeling the familiar ache of Sarah's memory, but also something new, something like peace. Then you came into my life. You taught me that love could also be fierce and strong, that it could survive wounds that should have been fatal, that it could grow in the most unlikely soil. I do not compare you to her, Kaya. You are your own person worthy of your own love. But I do thank God that he gave me a second chance at happiness, and I promise to spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret choosing me. Kaya's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. My people do not believe in love the way yours do. We believe in strength and honor in the bonds forged through shared struggle. For most of my life, I thought that was enough. I thought I did not need the kind of love your poets write about. She reached out and took his hands, her grip firm and warm. Then I met you. And I learned that love is not weakness. Love is the greatest strength there is. It gives us courage when we are afraid, hope, when we are lost, purpose, when we have nothing left. You gave me all of those things, Marcus Cole. You saw me when I was broken and bleeding and half dead from despair, and you did not turn away. You offered me shelter, not because you wanted something in return, but because you believed I was worth saving. No one had ever believed that before. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she did not wipe it away. I choose you, Marcus, not because you are strong or brave or handsome, though you are all of those things. I choose you because you are good, because you make me want to be good too, and because I cannot imagine facing another day without you by my side. Jenkins cleared his throat, clearly moved by the vows he had just witnessed. By the power vested in me by God in the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride. Marcus reached up to cup Kaya's face in his hands, marveling at how small his palms looked against her strong features. She leaned down to meet him, and their lips touched in a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness and promise of the life they were beginning together. The church erupted in cheers. Men who had fought beside them threw their hats in the air. Women who had been freed from slavery wept with joy. Even the most stoic of the Apache observers allowed themselves small smiles of approval. Marcus and Kaya broke apart, grinning at each other like fools, and turned to face the crowd together. Ladies and gentlemen, Jenkins announced, his voice ringing with pride, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Cole. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. There was food and drink and music, dancing and laughter, and stories told around crackling fires. Marcus watched Kaya move through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes with a grace that surprised even her. She had never been comfortable around large groups of people, had always preferred the solitude of the wilderness to the chaos of human society. But tonight she seemed almost at ease, as if the love surrounding her had softened the edges of her wariness. A young woman approached her, one of the captives they had freed from Harrow's operation. She was small and delicate, the complete opposite of Kaya in every physical way, but her eyes held the same fierce determination that Marcus had come to recognize in survivors. I wanted to thank you, the young woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, for everything you did, for giving me a chance to live again. Kaya knelt so that she was at the young woman's eye level, a gesture Marcus had seen her make many times with those who had been victimized. You saved yourself. We just opened the door. What you do with your freedom is up to you. The young woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. I want to fight, like you do. I want to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Kaya smiled, a rare expression of pure warmth. Then come find us when you are ready. We will teach you everything we know. The young woman embraced her, this giant warrior who had become a symbol of hope for so many, and Kaya held her gently, carefully, like something precious that might break. Marcus watched the exchange with a full heart. This was what they had fought for. Not just the defeat of enemies, but the creation of something new. A community built on mutual protection and respect. A future where the vulnerable did not have to stand alone. He crossed to where Kaya was standing and slipped his arm around her waist. Ready to go home, wife? The words sent a thrill through both of them, new and strange and wonderful. Yes, husband. I believe I am. They left the celebration to its own devices, slipping away into the night, riding back toward Hunter Creek Valley, under a sky blazing with stars. The cabin was waiting for them, dark and quiet, filled with memories of everything they had been through together. Marcus built a fire while Kaya stood at the window watching the moon rise over the mountains. "It is strange," she said quietly. "I have spent so long fighting, running, surviving. I do not know how to simply live." Marcus crossed to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We will figure it out together, one day at a time." She turned in his embrace, facing him, and the moonlight caught the gold of her eyes. "I want to try, Marcus. I want to be more than a warrior. I want to be a wife, a partner." She hesitated, then continued, "A mother if the spirits allow." Marcus felt his breath catch. "Are you sure after everything that was done to you? Everything those men tried to take, I would understand if you never wanted." She silenced him with a finger pressed to his lips. "What they tried to take from me was not motherhood. It was choice, the ability to decide for myself what my body would be used for." She removed her finger and replaced it with her lips, a brief, tender kiss. "Now I have that choice, and I choose to create life with you. Not because anyone is forcing me, but because I want to. Because the love we share deserves to grow into something new." "Then we will try," Marcus said simply. "And whatever happens, we will face it together." They made love that night with a tenderness that neither of them had known they were capable of. Not the desperate passion of people who feared tomorrow might never come, but the slow, sweet intimacy of those who knew they had all the time in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Kaya's massive body curled protectively around Marcus's smaller frame, and talked about the future. "I want to expand the safe houses," Marcus said. "Create a network that stretches across the entire territory, so that has somewhere to go, someone to help them start over." "We will need money," Kai replied. "Resources. People willing to devote their lives to the cause. We have the alliance, and we have the reputation we built during the war. People trust us now. They will support us. And what about us, the cabin, the valley, the life we have here? This will always be our home." Marcus turned to face her, tracing the line of her cheekbone with his finger. "But home is not just a place. It is wherever we are together." Kaya smiled, and in that smile, Marcus saw all the walls she had built coming down one by one. The name was new, strange on both their tongues, but it felt right. A blending of two worlds, two histories, two wounded souls who had somehow found wholeness in each other. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither of them dreamed of blood and fire and death. The weeks that followed were filled with the quiet work of building a life. Marcus repaired the damage the war had done to the cabin and surrounding buildings. He reinforced the stable, expanded the garden, added a second room to the cabin in anticipation of the family they hoped to create. The physical labor was good for him, a way to work through the trauma of everything they had experienced and transform it into something constructive. Kaya threw herself into training new fighters for the Alliance. Young men and women came from across the territory, drawn by the legend of the giant Apache and eager to learn the skills that had made her such a devastating warrior. She taught them the techniques her grandmother had taught her, the way of water and wind, of flowing around obstacles rather than crashing into them. But she also taught them something more important. She taught them why they were fighting. Strength without purpose is just violence, she told them. Anyone can learn to kill. The hard part is learning when not to kill, when to show mercy, when to walk away. A true warrior knows that the greatest victory is the battle that never has to be fought. The students absorbed her words with the reverence of disciples, and Marcus watched with pride as she shaped them into something more than fighters. She was creating a new generation of protectors, people who would carry on the work of the Alliance long after he and Kaya were gone. 3 months after the wedding, Kaya began to feel different. She did not mention it at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed. But Marcus noticed the changes in her, the way she moved more carefully, the way her hand drifted unconsciously to her belly, the way she smiled sometimes at nothing at all. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, she finally spoke. "I think I am with child." Marcus's heart stopped. "Are you sure?" "No. But I feel something I have never felt before. A presence, a life growing inside me." She turned to look at him, and in her golden eyes he saw a vulnerability she rarely showed. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to describe it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "I am terrified and overjoyed and grateful beyond words. I never thought I would have this chance again. After losing the baby we never got to meet, I thought that part of my life was over forever. Kaya pulled back to look at him, her expression serious. This child will not replace the one you lost. Nothing could. I know, and I would never want it to. But maybe Marcus paused, searching for the right words. Maybe this is a chance to honor their memory. To give the love I never got to give them to a new life, a new beginning. Kaya nodded slowly. My people believe that the spirits of those who die before their time sometimes return in the bodies of new children. Not the same person, but carrying a piece of what was lost. She placed her hand over her belly. Perhaps there is some truth in that. Perhaps there is. They sat together in the fading light, holding each other, and the precious secret growing between them in the future seemed brighter than it ever had before. The news spread quickly through the alliance. The giant Apache was with child. The legendary warrior was going to be a mother. The reactions were varied. Some celebrated seeing the pregnancy as a symbol of hope and renewal. Others worried, wondering if Kaya would be able to continue her work while carrying and raising a child. A few whispered doubts about whether such a union could produce healthy offspring, whether the mixing of races was against nature's plan. Marcus and Kaya ignored the whispers. They had faced far worse than gossip and survived. As Kaya's belly grew, her role in the alliance naturally shifted. She could no longer lead raids or engage in hand-to-hand combat, but her strategic mind and her reputation remained invaluable. She planned operations from the cabin-trained fighters when her body allowed and served as a symbol of what the alliance was fighting for. The child inside her is the future, Jenkins said during one of his visits. A future where people like her and people like Marcus can love each other openly, without fear. A future where children can be born into a world without the shadow of trafficking and slavery. That is a beautiful thought, Kaya replied. But we are not there yet, no. But we are closer than we were. The pregnancy was not easy. Kaya's body, built for warfare and survival, struggled with the demands of nurturing new life. She was sick, often exhausted constantly, her legendary strength reduced to a shadow of what it had been. There were nights when Marcus held her as she wept with frustration, feeling trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her commands. But there were also moments of profound joy. The first time she felt the baby move. The first time they heard the heartbeat. The way Marcus would lie with his head against her belly, talking to the child who could not yet understand his words but seemed to respond to them anyway. Your father was a fool when I met him, Kaya would say during these moments, a smile playing at her lips. He let a strange woman sleep in his house without any protection. He trusted me when he had no reason to trust anyone. And your mother was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen, Marcus would reply, but also the most beautiful. I knew from the first moment I saw her that she was going to change my life. I just did not know how much. The child became the center of their world, a focal point around which everything else revolved. They discussed names, debated traditions, dreamed about the kind of person this new life would become. If it is a boy, I want to name him Samuel Marcus, said one night, after my father. He was a good man, decent and hardworking. He deserved a grandson to carry on his name. And if it is a girl, then you choose. It should be an Apache name, something that connects her to your heritage. Kaya thought about this for a long time. Ayana, she said finally. It means eternal blossom. My grandmother used to say that women are like flowers that bloom forever, each generation carrying the seeds of the next. Ayana. Marcus tested the name on his tongue. I like it. Then it is settled. Samuel if the child is a boy. Ayana if the child is a girl. What if it is twins? Kaya laughed, a sound that had become more common in recent months. Then we will use both names and consider ourselves blessed. 7 months into the pregnancy, complications arose. Kaya woke in the middle of the night with pain lancing through her abdomen, pain worse than anything she had experienced in battle. She cried out and Marcus was at her side in an instant, his face pale with fear. Something is wrong, she gasped. The baby. Marcus did not waste time with questions. He rode to Red Valley at breakneck speed, returning hours later with the town doctor, an elderly man named Harrison, who had delivered more babies than he could count. Harrison examined Kaya with gentle hands and a worried expression. The baby is positioned wrong, he said finally. If it does not turn before the birth, there could be complications. Serious complications. What kind of complications? Marcus demanded. Harrison hesitated, the kind that could kill both mother and child. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had already lost one woman he loved in childbirth. The thought of losing Kaya the same way was more than he could bear. What can we do? Harrison shook his head slowly. Wait, pray. Sometimes the baby turns on its own. Sometimes it does not. Marcus turned to Kaya, expecting to see fear in her golden eyes. Instead, he saw determination. I have not survived everything I have survived to die in childbed, she said, her voice steady despite the pain. This baby will be born and we will both live to see it grow. But the complications, I have faced worse odds. We both have. She reached out and took his hand, her grip still strong despite her condition. Have faith, Marcus. In me. In us. In the life we have built together. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but he nodded. I have faith. I have always had faith in you. The weeks that followed were the longest of Marcus's life. He barely slept, barely ate, spending every moment at Kaya's side watching for any sign that the baby had moved, that the danger had passed. Jenkins came to pray with them. Elena organized the Alliance fighters to take over all operations, freeing Marcus and Kaya from any responsibilities beyond the birth. Even the most distant communities sent messages of support, tokens of affection, promises that whatever happened, the couple would not face it alone. And slowly, miraculously, the baby began to turn. Harrison came to check on Kaya every few days, and each visit brought slightly better news. The baby was moving, the position was improving. There was still risk, but the chances of a safe delivery were increasing. By the 8th month, Harrison declared that the immediate danger had passed. The baby is head down now, he said, a smile breaking across his weathered face. Everything looks normal. I see no reason why you should not have a healthy delivery. Kaya wept with relief, her iron control finally breaking under the weight of emotions she had been suppressing for weeks. Marcus held her, crying himself, thanking whatever gods or spirits had watched over them. We are going to be parents, she whispered against his chest. It is really happening. It is really happening, he agreed. And our child is going to be the most loved, most protected, most blessed child in the entire territory. Kaya pulled back and looked at him, her golden eyes shining. Our child will be free. That is the most important thing. Free to choose their own path, their own destiny. Free from the chains that bound both of our peoples for so long. Free, Marcus repeated. That is what we have been fighting for all along. The birth came on a night of full moon and clear skies. Kaya had been restless all day, her body telling her that the time was near. By evening, the contractions had started, and Marcus sent a rider to fetch Dr. Harrison while he prepared the cabin for what was to come. Jenkins arrived shortly after the doctor, offering to pray for a safe delivery. Elena came with him, ready to assist in any way she could. By the time the labor began in earnest, the cabin was full of people who loved Marcus and Kaya and wanted to support them through this most momentous of occasions. The labor was long and difficult, as first births often are. Kaya bore the pain with the same stoic determination she had shown in battle, refusing to cry out, refusing to show weakness. But Marcus could see the toll it was taking on her, could see the exhaustion in her eyes as the hours stretched on. Push, Harrison urged. Push now. Kaya pushed, her massive body straining with effort, her face contorted with the struggle of bringing new life into the world. I can see the head, Harrison announced. One more push, just one more. Kaya gathered what remained of her strength and pushed with everything she had. And then suddenly, miraculously, a baby's cry filled the air. It is a girl, Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. A beautiful, healthy girl. He placed the baby in Kaya's arms, and Marcus watched as his wife's face transformed. All the hardness, all the wariness, all the walls she had built to protect herself from a cruel world seemed to melt away in an instant. What remained was pure, unconditional love. Ayana, Kaya whispered, tears streaming down her face. Our eternal blossom. Marcus leaned in to look at his daughter, and what he saw took his breath away. She was perfect, tiny and wrinkled, and red-faced from crying, but perfect. She had her mother's golden eyes and her father's chin, a blending of two worlds into one miraculous new person. Hello, little one, he said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek. Welcome to the world. The baby stopped crying at the sound of his voice, turning her head toward him with an expression of curious wonder. In that moment, Marcus felt something shift inside him. A piece of his heart he thought had died with Sarah came back to life, reborn in the face of this child who carried all his hopes for the future. She knows you, Kaya said, smiling through her tears. She knows her father. I hope I can be the father she deserves. You already are. The night deepened around them, but inside the cabin, there was only light and warmth and the beginning of a new chapter. Jenkins led a quiet prayer of thanksgiving. Elena helped Harrison clean up after the delivery, and Marcus and Kaya sat together, their daughter cradled between them, marveling at the miracle they had created. I did not think I could love anything more than I love you, Kaya said softly. I was wrong. Marcus smiled in understanding exactly what she meant. Our hearts grew to make room for her. That is what love does. It expands. She will have a good life, Marcus. We will make sure of it. She will have the best life we can give her. And when she is old enough, we will tell her the story of how her parents met. How her mother was a fierce warrior who taught her father that strength and gentleness can exist in the same person. How her father was a stubborn rancher who taught her mother that love is worth risking everything for. And how they built a home in a valley at the edge of nowhere, Kaya added, and filled it with more happiness than either of them ever thought possible. Marcus leaned over and kissed her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby between them. Marcus leaned over and kissed her forehead, no words needed between them. The words were simple, but they held the weight of everything they had been through together. Every battle and every scar, every moment of despair and every spark of hope. Every choice that had led them to this point, two wounded souls who had found healing in each other's arms. Outside, the moon continued its slow journey across the sky, casting silver light over the mountains and valleys of the territory they had fought so hard to protect. Inside, a new family slept peacefully, dreaming of the future they would build together. The war was over. The healing had begun, and love, as it always does, had found a way. The first year of Ayana's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tender moments of first smiles and first words of the endless small miracles that marked the journey from infancy to childhood. Marcus and Kaya discovered that parenting was nothing like warfare, and yet somehow required many of the same skills: patience, endurance, the ability to function on almost no sleep, the willingness to sacrifice everything for someone you loved. Ayana grew quickly, far more quickly than either of them had expected. By 6 months, she was crawling with the speed and determination that kept both parents constantly on alert. By 9 months, she was pulling herself up on furniture and babbling in a language all her own. By her first birthday, she was taking her first unsteady steps, her golden eyes bright with triumph, as she toddled from her mother's arms to her father's. She is going to be tall, Kaya observed one afternoon, watching their daughter chase a butterfly through the garden. Look at those legs. She has my bones, Marcus smiled, scooping Ayana up as she tottered past him. As long as she has your heart too, I will be happy. Ayana squealed with delight, grabbing at her father's beard with tiny, surprisingly strong fingers. She had inherited her mother's strength along with her height, a fact that had resulted in more than a few bruises for both parents. She is definitely our daughter, Kaya said, laughing at Marcus's expression of mixed joy and pain. Strong-willed and stubborn as a mountain goat. I prefer to think of it as determined and persistent. Call it what you will. She will give us trouble when she is older. The words were prophetic, though neither of them knew it at the time. The alliance continued to grow under their leadership, expanding its reach across the territory and into neighboring regions. The network of safe houses they had dreamed of became a reality, with over 24 locations providing shelter and support to survivors of trafficking. The training programs Kaya had established produced a steady stream of new fighters, young men and women who carried on the work with dedication and skill. But success brought its own challenges. As the alliance became more visible, it also became more of a target. Traffickers who had once operated freely now found their activities disrupted at every turn, their profits dwindling, their networks exposed. Some adapted by moving their operations elsewhere. Others surrendered to the inevitable and abandoned the trade entirely, but a few chose to fight back. The first attack came when Ayana was 18 months old. Marcus was working in the stable when he heard the shots, distant but unmistakable. He dropped his tools and ran toward the cabin, his heart pounding with fear, his mind racing through all the terrible possibilities. He found Kaya standing on the porch, rifle in hand, Ayana clutched protectively against her chest. Three bodies lay in the yard, men who had tried to approach the cabin under cover of darkness and been cut down by Kaya's lethal accuracy. They came for us, she said, her voice calm, despite the violence that had just occurred. For Ayana. Marcus felt cold rage flood through him. Who sent them I do not know yet, but I intend to find out. The investigation that followed revealed a troubling truth. A new organization had risen from the ashes of Blackwood and Harrow's empires, a coalition of traffickers and criminals who had decided that the only way to survive was to eliminate the alliance once and for all. They called themselves the Shadow Syndicate, and their first order of business was destroying everyone responsible for their predecessor's downfall. Starting with Marcus and Kaya Cole. The next months were tense, filled with constant vigilance and the ever-present threat of attack. Security around the cabin was increased. Patrols were established throughout the valley. Ayana was never left alone. They're always watched by at least one trusted guardian. But the attacks continued. Supply convoys were ambushed. Safe houses were burned. Alliance fighters were killed in their beds. The Shadow Syndicate struck without warning and disappeared without a trace, leaving only death and destruction in their wake. We cannot keep playing defense, Marcus said during one emergency council meeting. They are bleeding us dry. Every attack costs us resources and morale. If we do not take the fight to them, they will eventually wear us down. And how do you propose we do that? Jenkins asked. We do not even know where they operate from. Then we find out, Kaya said, her golden eyes hard as stone. We infiltrate their organization, learn their secrets, and destroy them from within. That could take years. We have years. What we do not have is the luxury of waiting for them to destroy everything we have built. The infiltration began slowly, carefully. Alliance operatives posed as criminals seeking work as victims, desperate enough to sell information as corrupt officials willing to look the other way for the right price. They gathered intelligence, built relationships, worked their way deeper into the syndicate's operations. And gradually a picture began to emerge. The Shadow Syndicate was led by a man known only as the Architect. No one had ever seen his face or heard his real name. He communicated through intermediaries, issued orders through coded messages, moved like a ghost through the criminal underworld. But he was not invincible. He had weaknesses, vulnerabilities, patterns that could be exploited. His headquarters was a ranch in the mountains of New Mexico, a fortress protected by dozens of armed guards in miles of hostile terrain. Taking it by force would be suicide, but there might be another way. He has a weakness, one of the operatives reported. A woman. She is called the Raven, and she is his second in command. They say he trusts her above all others, that he would do anything for her. Kaya leaned forward, interest sparking in her eyes. Tell me more. The Raven was a mystery wrapped in an enigma. Some said she was the Architect's lover. Others claimed she was his daughter. Still others whispered that she was neither, that their relationship was based on something darker and more complicated than blood or desire. What everyone agreed on was that she was dangerous. A killer without conscience, a manipulator without equal, a woman who had clawed her way to the top of the criminal underworld through a combination of ruthlessness and brilliance. If we could turn her, the operative continued, or eliminate her, the entire organization would be thrown into chaos. Marcus shook his head. Turning someone like that would be almost impossible, and eliminating her would require getting close to the Architect himself. Then that is what we will do. Kaya's voice cut through the room, silencing all other discussion. I will go. I will infiltrate the ranch, get close to the Architect, and find a way to bring down his organization. Marcus stared at her, horror rising in his chest. Absolutely not. It is the only way. It is suicide. You would be walking into the heart of enemy territory with no backup and no escape route. I have survived worse. That was before we were married, before Ayana. I will not lose you to some madman's fortress. Kaya rose and crossed to where he sat, kneeling before him, so their eyes were level. Marcus, I understand your fear. I share it. Every time I think about leaving you and Ayana, even for a day, it feels like a knife in my heart. But this is not about what I want. It is about what is necessary. The Syndicate will not stop until we are all dead. If we do not act now decisively, we will be fighting this war forever. Then let me go instead. You cannot. She placed her hand on his cheek, her touch gentle. I do not say this to diminish you. You are a good fighter, a brilliant tactician, the best partner I could have asked for. But this mission requires something you cannot provide. What a giant Apache woman. Someone who matches the descriptions in all their intelligence reports. Someone they will believe is exactly who she claims to be. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the truth of her words, even as he desperately searched for an alternative. There has to be another way. If there is, I cannot see it, and we are running out of time. The decision was made that night after hours of argument, in tears, and whispered confessions in the darkness of their bedroom. Kaya would go. She would infiltrate the syndicate, posing as a defector from the Alliance, someone with valuable intelligence to sell. She would get close to the architect, learn his weaknesses, and find a way to bring down his organization from within. It was a desperate plan built on hope and desperation, and Kaya's unshakable belief that she could survive anything. Marcus hated it. He hated every aspect of it, from the danger to the deception to the weeks or months she would be gone. But he also knew it was necessary. The night before she left, they made love with a desperate intensity, trying to pack a lifetime of feelings into a few short hours. Afterward, Kaya held Ayana while she slept, memorizing every feature of their daughter's face. "Tell her about me," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "If I do not come back, tell her that her mother loved her more than anything in the world." "You will tell her yourself," Marcus replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You are coming back. I refuse to accept any other outcome." Kaya smiled sadly. "Your stubbornness is one of the things I love most about you. And your reckless courage is one of the things that terrifies me most about you." She kissed him then long and deep, and when she pulled away, her golden eyes were filled with a fierce determination. "I will come back, Marcus Cole. I promise you that. Whatever it takes, whoever I have to kill, I will come back to you and our daughter. I will hold you to that promise." She left at dawn, riding out of the valley on a horse that would carry her toward the mountains of New Mexico and the most dangerous mission of her life. Marcus stood on the porch, Ayana in his arms, watching until she disappeared over the horizon. "Mama," Ayana said, her small voice confused. "Mama gone. Mama will be back soon, baby. She just has something important to do." Even as he spoke the words, Marcus prayed they were true. The weeks that followed were agony. Reports came sporadically, fragmented pieces of intelligence gathered by operatives scattered throughout the territory. Kaya had made contact with syndicate agents in Santa Fe. She had been taken to a safe house for interrogation. She had passed their tests and been accepted as a potential asset. Then for 3 weeks, nothing. Marcus threw himself into work, using the demands of the Alliance to distract himself from the fear that gnawed at his insides. He trained fighters, planned operations, coordinated the network of safe houses that continued to grow despite the syndicate's attacks. He was Marcus Cole, leader of the Hunter Creek Compact, a symbol of resistance and hope. And every night he lay awake in an empty bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if his wife was alive or dead. Ayana felt her mother's absence keenly. She was too young to understand where Kaya had gone or why, but she knew that something was wrong. She cried him more often, slept poorly, clung to Marcus with a desperation that broke his heart. He told her stories every night, stories about her mother, about the warrior woman who had survived impossible odds and would survive them again. He told her about the first night Kaya had spent in his stable, about the battles they had fought together, about the love that had grown between them against all odds. "Your mother is the bravest person I have ever known," he said night after night. "She is fighting to keep us safe, to make the world a better place for you to grow up in. And she will come back. I know she will." Ayana did not understand all the words, but she understood the tone. She understood that her father believed what he was saying. And slowly, gradually, she began to believe it too. The breakthrough came on the 43rd day. A rider appeared at the edge of the valley, moving fast, carrying news that could not wait for the normal channels of communication. Marcus. Marcus met him at the gate, his heart pounding, preparing himself for the worst. "She is alive." The rider was breathless, barely able to get the words out. "She made contact yesterday. She is inside the ranch, close to the architect. And she has a plan." The relief that flooded through Marcus was almost overwhelming. He gripped the rider's arm, steadying himself. "Tell me everything." The plan was audacious, even by Kaya's standards. She had gained the trust of the Raven, the architect's second-in-command. The two women had formed an unlikely alliance bound by mutual respect and a shared history of trauma, at the hands of men who saw them as property rather than people. The Raven wanted out. She had been part of the syndicate since childhood, groomed by the architect to be his perfect weapon, and she was tired. Tired of the killing, tired of the fear, tired of living in the shadow of a man who saw her as a tool rather than a human being. Kaya had offered her something she had never had before: hope. Together, the two women had devised a plan to bring down the syndicate from within. The Raven would provide detailed intelligence about the architect's operations, his security protocols, the locations of all his assets. Kaya would transmit this information to the Alliance, allowing them to coordinate a massive strike that would destroy the syndicate once and for all. But there was a price. The Raven wanted asylum. She wanted protection from the syndicate's remaining members, who would certainly try to kill her once her betrayal was discovered. And she wanted something else, something that only Kaya could give her: forgiveness. "I have done terrible things," the Raven had told Kaya during one of their secret conversations. "Things that can never be undone. I do not expect absolution, but I need to know that someone somewhere sees me as more than a monster." Kaya had looked at this woman, this killer, who had caused so much pain and suffering, and seen something she recognized. A wounded soul twisted by circumstances beyond her control, desperate for a chance at redemption. "I do not forgive you," she had said. "I cannot forgive you for the things you have done, but I believe you are capable of becoming someone better, and I am willing to help you try." It was not forgiveness, but it was something. And for the Raven, it was enough. The strike was planned for a night 3 weeks hence, when the architect would be hosting a gathering of his most important allies. Every major figure in the syndicate would be present at the ranch, making it possible to decapitate the entire organization in a single blow. The Alliance mobilized everything it had. Fighters were recalled from across the territory. Weapons and supplies were gathered and positioned. Routes were mapped, contingencies prepared, prayers offered to whatever gods or spirits might be listening. And Marcus Cole, who had spent his entire adult life preparing for moments like this, found himself paralyzed with fear. Not fear of the battle itself. He had faced death too many times to be afraid of dying. But fear of losing Kaya. Fear that this mission, this desperate gamble, would take from him the only person who made his life worth living. He thought about Sarah, about the baby they had never gotten to meet. He thought about all the promises he had made to himself after their deaths, the vows to never love again, to never risk that kind of pain again. He had broken those vows. He had allowed himself to love Kaya, to build a life with her, to create a child who depended on them both. And now, just as he had feared, that love was threatening to destroy him. Jenkins found him in the stable the night before they were scheduled to leave, sitting alone in the darkness, wrestling with demons only he could see. "You should be resting," the old preacher said, settling onto a hay bale across from Marcus. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I cannot sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see her dying." That is fear talking. It is natural to be afraid for someone you love. Fear is one thing. This is something else. Marcus looked up, and Jenkins saw the raw anguish in his eyes. "What if I lose her, Jenkins? What if this mission goes wrong and she dies, and I have to explain to Ayana why her mother is never coming home? Then you will do what you have always done. You will grieve. You will mourn. And eventually you will find a way to go on. Not because you want to, but because you have to. Because that little girl needs a father, and because Kaya would want you to keep fighting. I do not know if I am strong enough." Jenkins leaned forward, his weathered face filled with compassion. "Let me tell you something I have learned in my many years on this earth. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite fear. Every time you have gone into battle, you have been afraid. Every time you have faced death, you have wanted to run. And every time you have chosen to stand your ground anyway. That is what strength is. And you have more of it than almost anyone I have ever met." Marcus was silent for a long moment, absorbing the old man's words. "What if it is not enough? Then we will trust that God has a plan, even if we cannot see it. And we will believe that whatever happens, the love you and Kaya share will endure. In this life or the next. I'm not sure I believe in the next life. Then believe in this one. Believe in the woman you married, and her strength and her courage and her absolute determination to come back to you. She has never broken a promise to you, has she?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, never." "Then trust her now. Trust that she will do everything in her power to survive. And do your part by being the leader these people need you to be. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside him. The fear was still there, would probably always be there. But alongside it was something else. Faith. In Kaya, in the cause they were fighting for, in the love that had sustained them through everything. Thank you, Jenkins, for everything. The old preacher smiled and rose to his feet. Get some sleep, Marcus. Tomorrow we go to war. The assault on the architect's ranch began at midnight. The Alliance fighters approached from 3 directions, using the terrain Kaya had mapped to avoid detection until they were almost at the walls. The Raven had disabled the perimeter alarms, creating a window of opportunity that would last only minutes before the guards realized something was wrong. Marcus led the main assault, a group of 30 fighters who would hit the front gate while 2 smaller teams flanked from the east and west. Their objective was simple: create chaos, draw attention, give Kaya time to do what she needed to do inside. The first shots were fired exactly on schedule, Alliance rifles speaking in the darkness, cutting down guards before they even knew they were under attack. The gates fell within minutes, breached by explosives the Raven had smuggled out of the armory, and the fighters poured into the compound like water through a broken dam. What followed was controlled mayhem. The Syndicate forces were caught completely off guard. Their leaders gathered in the main house for the architect's celebration, scrambled to organize a defense, while their soldiers ran about in confusion, unsure where the attack was coming from or how many enemies they faced. Marcus fought his way toward the main house, the training Kaya had given him, serving him well in the close-quarters combat that characterized the battle. He moved with a fluidity he had not possessed before meeting her, striking and withdrawing, using his enemy's strength against them, always advancing toward his objective. He had almost reached the main entrance when the explosion shattered the night. The entire east wing of the house erupted in flames, the force of the blast knocking Marcus off his feet and sending debris raining down across the compound. He scrambled upright, his ears ringing, his eyes searching frantically for the source of the explosion. Kaya. She had been in that wing. He ran toward the flames, ignoring the bullets that whizzed past his head, ignoring the shouts of his own fighters calling him back. Nothing mattered except reaching her, finding her, proving that she was still alive. The heat was intense, the smoke so thick he could barely see his hand in front of his face. He plunged into the burning building anyway, calling her name, searching through the wreckage for any sign of the woman he loved. He found her in what had been the architect's private study. She was standing over a body, her knife buried in the dead man's chest. Around her lay the remains of what must have been an epic battle: broken furniture and shattered glass, and the bodies of at least 6 guards who had tried to stop her. And standing beside her, looking shell-shocked but alive, was the Raven. "You came for me." Kaya's voice was rough with smoke inhalation, but her golden eyes were clear and bright. "I told you I would come back. I never doubted you. It was a lie and they both knew it. But it did not matter. What mattered was that she was alive, that they were together, that the nightmare was finally over." The fire spread quickly, driving them out of the burning building and into the chaos of the compound. The battle was winding down, Syndicate fighters surrendering in droves as they realized their leader was dead and their organization was collapsing around them. By dawn, it was over. The architect was dead. His organization was destroyed. The Shadow Syndicate, which had terrorized the territory for years, was nothing but ashes and memories. And Marcus Cole held his wife in his arms, weeping with relief, thanking whatever gods or spirits had watched over them through this long and terrible night. The journey home took 3 days, slowed by the need to escort prisoners and tend to wounded fighters. Marcus and Kaya rode side by side, rarely more than arm's length apart, as if they feared that separation might break the spell and prove that their reunion was only a dream. The Raven rode with them, her dark eyes wary and watchful. The other Alliance fighters kept their distance from her, unable to reconcile the killer they knew she had been with the ally she had become. But Kaya stayed close, offering her presence, if not her friendship, honoring the promise she had made. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked her one evening as they camped beneath the stars. The Raven shrugged her face, impossible to read. "I do not know. For so long, my entire life was defined by the architect and his plans. Now that he is gone, I feel like a ship without a sail. I know I need to move, but I do not know which direction." "You could stay with us," Kaya offered. "Help rebuild the territory. Use your skills for something other than destruction." The raven turned to look at her, and for a moment something flickered in those dark eyes. Hope, perhaps, or the memory of what hope used to feel like. Would people accept me? After everything I have done, some would. Others would not. But the choice is yours. You can run from your past, or you can face it. You can let your sins define you, or you can work to become someone better. The raven was silent for a long time. Then slowly she nodded. I will try. That is all I can promise. That is enough. They reached Hunter Creek Valley on the afternoon of the third day, and Marcus felt something loosen in his chest at the sight of the cabin, the stable, the mountains rising in the distance. This was home. This was where his life had begun again, where he had found love and purpose and a reason to keep fighting. And standing on the porch, held in the arms of Elena, was Ayanna. Mama, the little girl's scream of joy, could probably be heard in the next territory. Mama home. Kaya was off her horse before it had fully stopped running toward the porch with an urgency Marcus had rarely seen in her. She swept Ayanna into her arms, holding her tight, covering her face with kisses while tears streamed down her cheeks. My baby, my precious little blossom. Mama missed you so much. Miss Mama too. Ayanna replied, her small arms wrapped around her mother's neck. No go away again. Stay home. I am home, baby. I am home, and I am never leaving you again. Marcus joined them on the porch, wrapping his arms around both of them, completing the circle. They stood there for a long time, three people who had survived impossible odds to be together, savoring the simple miracle of their reunion. I love you, Marcus, whispered into Kaya's hair. Both of you, more than I ever thought possible. We love you too, Daddy. Ayanna said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. Forever and ever, Kaya agreed. The sun began to set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The cabin glowed with warmth and light, a beacon in the gathering darkness. And the Cole family reunited at last, went inside to begin the next chapter of their lives. 6 months later, Kaya discovered she was pregnant again. The news came as a surprise to both of them. They had talked about having more children, but had decided to wait until the territory was more stable, until the threat of the syndicate was truly gone. But nature, it seemed, had other plans. Are you happy? Marcus asked, watching her face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Kaya placed her hand over her belly, feeling the new life that was growing there. I am terrified, she admitted. After everything with Ayanna, after all the complications and fear, I did not know if I wanted to go through that again. We do not have to. There are ways to. Marcus stopped, unable to finish the sentence. No, Kaya shook her head firmly. I said I was terrified, not that I did not want this. Fear and desire are not mutually exclusive. She looked up at him, her golden eyes soft. I want this child, Marcus. I want to fill this house with children, to create a family so large and loud and loving that no one will ever doubt that we belong together. Then that is what we will do. This pregnancy was easier than the first. Kaya's body, stronger and healthier after years of peace and plenty, adapted to the demands of nurturing new life with far less struggle. The morning sickness was mild, the complications non-existent, the growth of her belly a source of joy rather than fear. Ayanna was fascinated by the changes in her mother's body. She would press her ear against Kaya's belly, listening for sounds of her sibling, and pepper both parents with questions about where babies came from and how they got out, and whether she could keep the baby in her room like a pet. The baby is not a pet, sweetie, Marcus explained for the 100th time. It is going to be your brother or sister. Someone you can play with and protect and love for the rest of your life. I want a sister, Ayanna declared firmly. Boys are stinky, Marcus laughed. Well, we do not get to choose. We take what we are given and love them no matter what. Even if they are stinky. Even then. The birth came on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the valley and the air was sweet with the promise of renewal. It was faster than Ayanna's birth, easier, as if Kaya's body remembered the process and knew exactly what to do. Dr. Harrison arrived just in time to catch the baby as it emerged, a healthy, squalling infant who seemed to fill the room with the force of its cries. It is a boy, Harrison announced, his weathered face creased with a smile. A strong, healthy boy. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. Samuel. Named for his grandfather, carrying the legacy of a good man into a new generation. Hello, little one, he whispered. taking the baby from Harrison and cradling him gently. "Welcome to the world." Ayana crowded close, her golden eyes wide with wonder. "He is so small," she breathed, "and so loud." "Babies are loud," Kaya said, her voice exhausted but happy. "That is how they tell us what they need." "What does he need right now?" "Right now, he needs his family to love him. That is all any of us really need." Marcus handed Samuel to Kaya, watching as she settled him against her chest and began to nurse. The baby quieted immediately, his tiny mouth finding what it needed, his small hand curling around his mother's finger. It was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen. "We did this," he said softly. "We created this life, this family, this future." "We did," Kaya agreed. "And we will keep building it one day at a time for as long as we live." Ayana climbed onto the bed beside her mother, careful not to disturb her new brother. "I love him," she announced, "even if he is stinky." The room filled with laughter, the sound echoing off the walls and out through the open window, carried on the spring breeze to the valley below. In Hunter Creek Valley, in a cabin built by a lonely rancher who had thought he would never love again, a family was complete. The years that followed were the happiest of Marcus Cole's life. He watched his children grow, Ayana blossoming into a young woman with her mother's strength and her father's stubborn determination, Samuel developing into a thoughtful, gentle boy who preferred books to battles but could hold his own when necessary. He watched his wife lead the alliance with wisdom and compassion, her reputation as a warrior gradually giving way to her reputation as a peacemaker. He watched the territory transform around them. The trafficking networks that had once plagued the region were dismantled, their leaders dead or imprisoned, their victims freed and supported in rebuilding their lives. The alliance evolved from a resistance movement into a legitimate governing body, establishing laws and courts and systems of justice that protected the vulnerable and punished the guilty. Native peoples who had been persecuted and marginalized for generations began to reclaim their place in the territory. The old prejudices did not disappear overnight, but they began to fade, replaced by a growing recognition that all people deserve dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin or the traditions of their ancestors. And at the center of it all stood the Cole family, a living symbol of what was possible when love conquered fear. "You know," Kaya said one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, "when I first came to this valley, I thought I was going to die. I had given up hope. I believed that the world was nothing but cruelty and pain, and that people like me would never find peace. And now I know better." She turned to look at him, her golden eyes soft with a love that had only deepened over the years. "You saved me, Marcus, not just my body but my soul. You showed me that kindness still existed, that love was possible, that I was worthy of being loved. I did not save you. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to rest." She smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. Maybe that is what saving someone really means. Not doing the work for them, but giving them the space and support to do it themselves. Marcus reached out and took her hand, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin, the strength that lay beneath it. "I love you, Kaya Cole, as much today as the day I married you. More even. Every day with you has been a gift. And I love you, Marcus Cole, for showing me that love is not weakness, for giving me children and purpose in a home, for being exactly who I needed even before I knew I needed anyone." They sat together in the fading light, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Behind them in the cabin, Ayana and Samuel were arguing about something trivial, their voices rising and falling in the eternal rhythm of sibling rivalry. The sound made Marcus smile. It was the sound of normalcy, of family, of a life he had never dared to dream was possible. "Do you ever regret it?" Kaya asked. "Letting me stay that first night, taking the risk." Marcus did not hesitate. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children. You gave me a reason to live when I had lost all reasons. You gave me hope when hope seemed impossible." "Hope," Kaya repeated softly. "That is what we gave each other, I think. Hope and love. Yes, and love." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, the sound carrying across the valley like a song. Marcus thought about all the years that lay behind them, all the battles they had fought and won, all the sacrifices they had made. He thought about Sarah and the baby who had never been born, about the grief that had almost destroyed him and the love that had saved him. And he thought about the future, the years that still lay ahead, the grandchildren they might one day hold, the legacy they would leave behind. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, we will face it together. Always, Kaya agreed. Together, always. The darkness settled over Hunter Creek Valley, gentle and peaceful, like a blanket drawn over sleeping children. The stars emerged one by one, bright points of light in the vast expanse of the sky. And in the cabin on the hill, a fire burned in the hearth, casting warm light through the windows, a beacon in the darkness. A beacon of hope, a beacon of love, a beacon of the future they had built together one day at a time against all odds. 15 years had passed since the fall of the Shadow Syndicate, and the territory had been transformed beyond recognition. Red Valley had grown from a dusty frontier town into a thriving hub of commerce and culture. New buildings rose along streets that had once been little more than muddy paths. A school had been established then, a hospital, then a newspaper that reported on events from across the region. The church where Marcus and Kaya had married now stood alongside a new meeting house where representatives from communities throughout the territory gathered to make decisions about their shared future. The Hunter Creek Compact had evolved into something its founders had never imagined. What had begun as a desperate alliance of victims and fighters had become the foundation of a new kind of government, one built on principles of equality and justice that were still radical in most parts of the country. Native peoples sat alongside white settlers in the council chambers. Women held positions of authority that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. Former enemies worked together to build something better than the world they had inherited. And at the center of it all, though they rarely sought the spotlight anymore, were Marcus and Kaya Cole. They had stepped back from active leadership years ago, passing the torch to younger hands, while remaining available for guidance and counsel. Jenkins had died peacefully in his sleep 3 winters past, and his successor as spiritual leader of the community was a young Apache woman named Sarah, named for Marcus's first wife by parents who wanted to honor the man who had saved their daughter from slavery. The Raven, whose real name turned out to be Catherine, had become one of the territory's most respected judges. Her past was not forgotten, but it had been tempered by years of service and a genuine commitment to justice that had won over even her harshest critics. She visited the Cole homestead, often drawn by the only family she had ever truly known. Ayana was 16 now, tall like her mother, but with her father's thoughtful eyes and quiet strength. She had inherited Kaya's fighting abilities and spent hours each day training with the warriors who still sought instruction from the legendary giant Apache. But she had also inherited Marcus's love of books and learning and spent equal time studying history and philosophy and the art of governance. She will be a leader someday, Kaya observed one morning, watching their daughter practice with a wooden training sword in the yard below. Perhaps the greatest leader this territory has ever seen. If she chooses that path, Marcus replied, we cannot choose it for her, no, but we can prepare her for it, give her the tools she will need. Samuel was 12, a quiet boy who preferred the company of animals to people. He had a gift for healing that bordered on the miraculous, able to calm the most frightened horse or coax a wounded hawk back to health with nothing but patience and gentleness. Dr. Harrison, in his final years, had begun teaching Samuel the basics of medicine, recognizing in the boy a calling that transcended ordinary talent. He reminds me of my grandmother, Kaya said. She had the same connection to living things. She used to say that healing was not about forcing the body to obey, but about listening to what it needed and helping it find its own way back to wholeness. Maybe that is what Samuel will become, a healer for the territory the way you were a warrior. Kaya smiled, but there was something sad in her expression. I hope his path is easier than mine. I hope he never has to learn the things I learned, never has to become what I became. He will face his own challenges. Every generation does. But he will not face them alone. The peace they had built was not perfect. There were still tensions between communities, disputes over land and resources, and the countless small grievances that arise whenever human beings live in close proximity. There were still criminals who preyed on the vulnerable, though they operated in the shadows now, rather than openly as they once had. There were still those who looked at Kaya and saw only an Apache, who looked at Marcus and saw a race traitor, who looked at their children and saw abominations. But these voices were quieter now, drowned out by the chorus of those who had built something better together. The world was changing slowly but surely, and Hunter Creek Valley was at the forefront of that change. On the morning of Ayana's 17th birthday, everything changed. A rider arrived at the homestead dusty and exhausted from days of hard travel. He carried a message from the territorial governor, a man named Harrison Blake, who had risen to power on a platform of unity and progress. The message was brief and alarming. War was coming, not the small-scale conflicts they had grown accustomed to, not the territorial disputes that could be resolved through negotiation and compromise. Real war between the United States government and the last remaining free Apache tribes who had retreated into the mountains of Arizona and refused to submit to reservation life. The government was mobilizing troops. Thousands of soldiers were being sent west with orders to crush the resistance once and for all. And the territorial governor was being pressured to contribute men and resources to the campaign. Blake was asking for Marcus and Kaya's counsel. He knew that any decision he made would have profound consequences for the delicate peace they had built. He knew that the Cole family's influence could tip the balance in either direction, and he knew that this was not simply a political question for them. It was personal. "They cannot ask us to fight against my people," Kaya said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "They cannot expect me to help them destroy the last remnants of everything I came from. They are not asking you to fight. They are asking us to advise, and what advice can we give? Support the war and betray my heritage. Oppose it and risk everything we have built." Marcus sat in silence, turning the problem over in his mind. It was the kind of impossible choice that had no good answer, the kind of decision that would haunt them, regardless of which path they took. "We need more information," he said finally. "We need to understand what is really happening before we can decide how to respond. You want to go there? To Arizona, I want to see for myself. Talk to the people involved. Understand the situation from all sides before we commit to any course of action." Kaya stared at him for a long moment, her golden eyes unreadable. "You know that if we go, we may not be able to remain neutral. We may be forced to choose sides." "I know, but I would rather make an informed choice than a blind one." The journey to Arizona took 3 weeks through some of the most rugged terrain in the American West. They traveled with a small escort trusted fighters who had been with them since the earliest days of the alliance, and they traveled carefully, aware that the region they were entering was already a war zone in all but name. What they found when they arrived was worse than they had imagined. The Apache resistance was centered in a network of mountain strongholds, natural fortresses, that had protected the tribes for generations. The people who lived there were not criminals or savages, as the government propaganda claimed. They were families, communities, human beings fighting for the right to live as they always had on land that had belonged to their ancestors for thousands of years. But they were also desperate. The army had cut off their supply lines, poisoned their water sources, burned their crops. Children were starving. Elders were dying of diseases that could have been treated with medicine. The soldiers refused to provide. Warriors who had once been proud and strong were reduced to raiding settlements for food, confirming the government's narrative of Apache savagery. Kaya walked through the camps with tears streaming down her face, seeing her own history reflected in the suffering around her. "This is what they wanted for me," she whispered. "This is what I escaped." Marcus held her hand, unable to find words that could ease her pain. They met with the leaders of the resistance, men and women who remembered Kaya's family, who had heard stories of the giant Apache, who had built a new life in the territories to the north. They were suspicious at first, wary of any outsider, but Kaya spoke to them in their own language, shared memories of the world they had lost, and gradually they began to trust her. The leader of the resistance was a man named Grey Wolf, an elder warrior who had been fighting the white man's encroachment since before Kaya was born. His face was lined with age and sorrow, but his eyes were still sharp, still burning with the fire that had kept his people alive against impossible odds. "You built something in the north," he said to Kaya and Marcus after they had spent several days in the camps. "A place where our people and your people live together in peace. We have heard the stories." "The stories are true," Marcus replied. "It was not easy, and it is not perfect, but it is real." Grey Wolf nodded slowly. "We have dreamed of such a place, a world where our children do not have to choose between death and submission. But the white man's government does not want peace. They want our land, our resources, our complete destruction." "Not all white men," Kaya said. Marcus is proof of that, and there are others like him, many others. Perhaps. But they are not the ones making decisions. They are not the ones sending soldiers to kill our children. What would it take, Marcus asked? What would it take to end this conflict without more bloodshed? Grey Wolf laughed bitterly. A miracle. The government would have to recognize our right to exist, to live on our own land, to govern ourselves according to our own traditions. They would have to see us as human beings rather than obstacles to be removed. And if we could make that happen, the old warrior stared at him with ancient, weary eyes. Then we would have peace, but such things do not happen in this world. They do not happen unless someone makes them happen. Grey Wolf studied Marcus for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Kaya. Your husband is either very brave or very foolish. He is both, Kaya replied. It is one of the things I love most about him. The plan they developed was ambitious beyond anything they had ever attempted. It would require every ounce of influence they had built over the years, every favor they were owed, every relationship they had cultivated. It would require convincing people who had every reason to hate each other to sit down and talk instead of fight. And it would require Marcus and Kaya to put everything they had built at risk. They returned to Hunter Creek Valley and immediately began sending messages to every ally they had. The territorial governor, Governor Blake, was the first to respond, agreeing to a meeting that would bring together representatives from the government, the military, and the Apache resistance. It was an unprecedented gathering held on neutral ground in a valley that belonged to no one. Soldiers stood across from warriors who had killed their comrades. Government officials sat across from leaders they had branded as terrorists. And in the middle of it all stood Marcus and Kaya Cole, mediating between worlds that had never learned to speak to each other. The negotiations lasted for weeks. There were moments when everything nearly fell apart, when old hatreds and fresh wounds threatened to derail the entire process. There were shouting matches and walked-out meetings, and at least one incident that nearly escalated to violence. But there were also moments of connection, of understanding, of recognition that the enemy across the table was a human being with fears and hopes and loved ones waiting at home. Kaya spoke to the Apache leaders in their own language, reminding them of the future they were fighting for, the children who deserved to grow up in a world without war. Marcus spoke to the government officials in terms they understood, explaining the political and economic benefits of peace, the costs of continued conflict. And slowly, painfully, an agreement began to take shape. The Apache would be granted a portion of their ancestral lands, not all of it, but enough to sustain their communities and preserve their way of life. They would have autonomy to govern themselves according to their own traditions, subject only to the basic laws that applied to everyone in the territory. In return, they would agree to cease all hostilities and work with the government to maintain peace along the frontier. It was not everything the Apache wanted. It was not everything the government wanted, but it was something neither side had thought possible just weeks earlier: a chance for peace. The agreement was signed on a cool autumn morning, with representatives from both sides putting their names to a document that would change the course of history. Grey Wolf, who had spent his entire life fighting, was the last to sign. He held the pen for a long moment, staring at the paper, and when he finally wrote his name, his hand was trembling. "I never thought I would see this day," he said quietly. "I never thought I would live to see peace." "You made it happen," Kaya replied. "Your courage, your willingness to take a risk, that is what made this possible." "No," Grey Wolf shook his head. "You made it happen. You and your husband. You showed us that there was another way." He reached out and clasped her hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man of his years. "You have given my people a future. I do not have words to express what that means." Kaya felt tears welling in her eyes, but she did not look away. "My grandmother used to say that we are all part of the same story, that the boundaries between peoples are illusions created by fear and ignorance. She said that if we could learn to see each other as family, as different branches of the same tree, we could accomplish anything." She was a wise woman. She was. And I have spent my whole life trying to live up to her teachings. The celebration that followed the signing was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. Apache and white settlers mingled freely, sharing food and stories, and the simple joy of a future that suddenly seemed brighter. Musicians played songs from both traditions, and children who had never known anything but war ran and played together, oblivious to the historical significance of what was happening around them. Marcus stood at the edge of the gathering, watching his wife move through the crowd, speaking with leaders and commoners, alike a bridge between worlds that had seemed irreconcilable just weeks earlier. "She is remarkable," a voice said beside him. He turned to find Governor Blake standing there, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a contemplative expression on his face. "She is," Marcus agreed. "When I first heard about her, about both of you, I thought the stories must be exaggerated. A giant Apache woman and a former cavalry soldier building a utopia in the mountains. It sounded like a fairy tale. And now I understand that fairy tales sometimes come true, not because of magic, but because of people who refuse to accept that the world cannot be changed." Marcus smiled. "We did not do this alone. We had help from more people than I can count." "Maybe so, but someone had to start it. Someone had to take the first step to show everyone else what was possible. That was you and Kaya." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the celebration unfold around them. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "The agreement is signed, but agreements can be broken. How do we make sure this peace lasts?" Blake sighed. "That is the question, is it not? I wish I had a simple answer. The truth is, peace is not something you achieve once and then forget about. It is something you have to work at every day for the rest of your life. It requires constant vigilance, constant commitment, constant willingness to put the common good above personal interest. That sounds exhausting." "It is. But the alternative is worse." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we keep working, we keep building, we keep showing people that there is another way." Blake raised his glass. "To the future. To the future." They drank together, two men who had once been strangers, bound now by a shared commitment to something larger than themselves. The return to Hunter Creek Valley felt different this time. The mountains that had once seemed like barriers now felt like protectors, sheltering the community they had built from a world that was still learning to change. The cabin that had been Marcus's refuge from grief was now the heart of a family that spanned generations and cultures. Ayana was waiting for them on the porch, her expression a mixture of relief and frustration. "You were gone for months," she said, embracing first her mother and then her father. "I was starting to think you had forgotten about us." "Never," Kaya replied. "We could never forget about you." "What happened?" Samuel appeared in the doorway, his 12-year-old curiosity getting the better of his usual shyness. "Did you stop the war?" Marcus and Kaya exchanged a look. "We made a start," Marcus said. "The war is not over, not completely. But we created a path toward peace. What happens next depends on a lot of people, including both of you." Usayana looked surprised. "What can we do?" "More than you know," Kaya said. "The world is changing and the next generation will inherit whatever we build today. You will have to decide whether to preserve what we have created or let it slip away." Ayana's expression grew serious, more mature than her 17 years should have allowed. "I want to help. I want to be part of building something that matters." "Then that is what you will do. But first you will finish your education. Learn everything you can about history, about governance, about how to bring people together instead of driving them apart. The skills you develop now will serve you for the rest of your life." "What about me?" Samuel asked, not wanting to be left out. "You will continue your studies with Dr. Harrison's successor. The territory will need healers as much as it needs leaders. Perhaps more." Samuel nodded, his face thoughtful. "I had a dream while you were gone," he said quietly. "I dreamed that I was standing in a place I did not recognize, surrounded by people who were sick and hurting. And I knew somehow that I was supposed to help them. That helping them was what I was born to do." Kaya knelt so that she was at her son's eye level, her golden eyes meeting his. "Dreams like that are not accidents. They are messages from the spirits telling us what we need to know. If you dreamed of healing, then healing is your path. Trust that. Follow it wherever it leads." Samuel nodded again, more confidently this time. "I will, Mother. I promise." The family went inside together, leaving the sunset to paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The fire was already burning in the hearth, filling the cabin with warmth and the scent of wood smoke. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, prepared by the neighbors who had watched over the children during their parents' absence. "This is what we fought for," Marcus thought, as he settled into his chair by the fire. "Not glory or power or recognition. Just this, a family, a home, a place where we belong." Kaya sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, her breathing slow and peaceful. "I was thinking about something Grey Wolf said," she murmured. "He called our agreement a miracle. But it was not a miracle, was it?" It was just hard work, day after day, year after year. Building trust, building relationships, building the foundation for something better. Maybe that is what miracles really are, Marcus replied. Not supernatural events that happen despite human effort, but natural events that happen because of it. My grandmother would have liked you. She always said that the greatest magic was the magic we create ourselves. I wish I could have met her. In a way you have. Everything I am, everything I believe comes from her teachings. When you married me, you married her legacy. Then I am twice blessed. Kaya smiled and pressed closer to him. We both are. The fire crackled, the children's voices murmured from the next room, and the world outside grew dark and quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to build or destroy. But tonight, there was only this moment, this peace, this love, that had survived everything the world had thrown at it. Marcus thought about all the years that had brought him to this point, the grief and the healing, the battles and the reconciliations, the long, slow process of becoming the person he was meant to be. He thought about Sarah, his first wife, and the baby who had never taken a breath. He thought about the dark years after their deaths when he had wanted nothing more than to follow them into the grave. He thought about the night Kaya had stumbled into his stable half dead and desperate, and how that moment had changed everything. He thought about Ayana and Samuel, the children who had given him a reason to look forward instead of backward. He thought about Jenkins and Elena and Catherine and all the others who had become part of his family in ways he had never expected. And he thought about the future, the years that still lay ahead, the world that was slowly, painfully learning to be better. Thank you, he whispered, not sure who he was addressing. Sarah, maybe? Or Ga? Or the universe itself? Thank you for giving me a second chance. Kaya stirred against his shoulder. Did you say something, just thinking out loud? About what? About how grateful I am. For you, for our children, for this life we have built. Kaya lifted her head and looked at him, her golden eyes soft in the firelight. I am grateful too. Every day I wake up grateful. For so long, I thought I did not deserve happiness. I thought the things that had been done to me had made me broken, unfixable. But you showed me that was not true. You were never broken, Kaya. You were wounded. There is a difference. I know that now. But it took a long time to learn, and I could not have learned it without you. She kissed him soft and slow, a kiss that held all the love and gratitude and hope that words could not express. I love you, Marcus Cole. I love you too, Kaya Cole. The words were familiar, spoken 1,000 times before, but they never lost their power. They never stopped meaning everything. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow from the distant peaks. The world was vast and ancient and indifferent to human concerns. But in the cabin on the hill, there was warmth and light and love. There was a family that had been forged through struggle and sacrifice. There was a future that had been won through courage and compassion. And that was enough. That was more than enough. 5 years later, Ayana Cole stood before the assembled representatives of the Hunter Creek Compact, preparing to accept the position of First Speaker, the highest elected office in the territory. She was 22 years old, tall and strong like her mother, with her father's thoughtful eyes, and a voice that commanded attention without raising its volume. She had spent the past 5 years traveling throughout the territory and beyond, learning everything she could about governance and diplomacy, building relationships with leaders from every community and faction. Now she was ready to lead. Marcus and Kaya sat in the front row of the assembly hall, watching their daughter with a mixture of pride and anxiety. They had done everything they could to prepare her for this moment, but ultimately her success or failure would depend on her own choices. My friend's Ayana began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the hall. We stand today at a crossroads. The peace we have built over the past decades is real and precious, but it is not guaranteed. It requires constant attention, constant nurturing, constant willingness to put the common good above personal interest. She paused, letting her words sink in. I stand before you not as a symbol or a figurehead, but as a servant. My job is not to rule you, but to represent you, to listen to your concerns, to advocate for your interests, to work every day to make this territory a better place for all its people. Her eyes swept across the assembly, taking in the diverse faces that had come together to choose their leader. I know that some of you have doubts about me. You wonder if I am too young, too inexperienced, too idealistic to handle the challenges that lie ahead. Those doubts are fair. I have not lived as long as many of you have not seen as much, have not made as many mistakes. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd and Ayana smiled. But I have learned from those who came before me, from my mother who taught me that strength without compassion is tyranny, from my father who taught me that courage without wisdom is recklessness, from the elders of every community in this territory who have shared their knowledge and their experience with me over these past 5 years. She straightened her posture, reflecting the confidence she had worked so hard to develop. I cannot promise you perfection. I cannot promise that I will never make mistakes, never face challenges I do not know how to solve. But I can promise you this: I will work every day with every ounce of strength and wisdom I possess to build on the foundation my parents' generation created, to make this territory a beacon of hope for the rest of the country and the rest of the world. Her voice rose, filled with passion and conviction. We have proven that people from different backgrounds can live together in peace. We have proven that old hatreds can be healed, that new alliances can be forged, that the future does not have to repeat the mistakes of the past. Now it is time to show the world that what we have built here is not an aberration, but a model. Not a dream, but a reality that others can achieve if they have the courage to treat on. She looked directly at her parents, her golden eyes bright with determination. I am Ayana Cole, daughter of Marcus, and Kaya Cole, granddaughter of warriors and healers and dreamers who never stopped believing in a better world. And I am honored to serve as your first speaker. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the walls of the assembly hall and spilling out into the streets beyond. People who had once been enemies embraced each other in celebration. Old wounds not fully healed, but no longer bleeding, faded a little further into memory. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but he made no move to wipe them away. We did this, he whispered to Kaya. We made this possible. No, Kaya replied, her own eyes glistening. She did this. She is the one who stepped up, who worked for years to prepare herself, who earned the trust of people who had every reason to doubt her. But we gave her the foundation. We showed her what was possible. And now she will show the next generation. That is how it works. That is how change happens. They sat together holding hands, watching their daughter accept congratulations from the assembled representatives. Around them, the world continued to turn, bringing new challenges and new opportunities with each passing moment. But for now, in this moment, there was only gratitude and hope and the quiet satisfaction of seeing a dream become reality. Ayana Cole, first speaker of the Hunter Creek Compact, descendant of warriors and healers, child of two worlds who had learned to become one. The future had arrived, and it was beautiful. Samuel Cole took a different path. At 17, he left Hunter Creek Valley to study medicine at one of the new universities that had sprung up in the East. It was a difficult decision, leaving behind the only home he had ever known, but he knew that his calling required training he could not receive in the territory. He excelled in his studies, driven by the same quiet determination that had characterized him since childhood. His professors remarked on his unusual gift for diagnosis, his ability to sense what was wrong with a patient even before the tests confirmed it. Some called it intuition. Others called it genius. Samuel knew it was something else, something his mother had recognized in him from the very beginning. He returned to the territory 5 years later, a fully trained physician with skills that were desperately needed in the growing communities. He established a clinic in Red Valley, treating everyone who came to his door regardless of their ability to pay. Native and white, rich and poor, young and old, all were welcome in Samuel Cole's practice. He married a young Apache woman named Morning Star, a healer in her own right, who had been trained in the traditional medicine of her people. Together, they developed an approach that combined the best of both worlds, using Western techniques when they were appropriate and traditional remedies when they worked better. Their clinic became famous throughout the region, drawing patients from hundreds of miles away. But Samuel never lost sight of his roots, never forgot the lessons his parents had taught him about service and humility and the responsibility that came with his gifts. You could make a fortune in the cities, Morning Star said to him one evening as they sat together on the porch of their home. The wealthy would pay anything for your skills. Samuel shook his head. I did not become a healer to serve the wealthy. I became a healer to serve those who need me most. And who needs you most? The people here. The ones who have no one else to turn to. The ones who have been told their entire lives, that they do not matter. Morningstar smiled and leaned against his shoulder. Your mother was right about you, about what she told me the first time we met, that you had an old soul, that you had been sent to heal not just bodies but communities. I thought she was exaggerating. And now I know she was not. Samuel thought about his mother's words, about the dreams he had experienced as a child, about the path that had led him to this moment. I hope I can live up to her expectations. You already have. Every life you save, every person you help, you are fulfilling the purpose she saw in you from the beginning. He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, the strength that lay beneath it. I could not do this without you. You would find a way. You always do. But I am glad I do not have to. They sat together in the fading light, two healers bound by love and purpose, watching the sun set over a world that was slowly learning to be better. The years continued to pass, marking the slow transformation of the territory and the people who lived there. Marcus and Kaya grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements becoming slower and more deliberate. But their love never faded, never diminished, never stopped being the foundation on which everything else was built. They watched their grandchildren grow, Ayana's three daughters and Samuel's two sons, a new generation that knew nothing of the wars and struggles that had shaped their grandparents' lives. For them, peace was not something to be fought for, but simply the way the world was supposed to work. Sometimes Marcus worried that they had made things too easy. They do not understand what it cost, he said to Kaya one evening, watching their grandchildren play in the yard below. They do not appreciate how close we came to losing everything. Maybe they do not need to, Kaya replied. Maybe that is the point of everything we did, to create a world where children do not have to understand suffering because they have never experienced it. But what happens when suffering comes, when the peace we built is threatened? Then they will learn what they need to learn, just as we did, just as every generation does. Marcus sighed. I suppose you are right. I am always right. You should know that by now. He laughed, the sound mixing with the shrieks of joy from the children below. 50 years of marriage, and you are still the most stubborn woman I have ever known. And you are still the most foolish man I have ever loved. But I would not have it any other way. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his as naturally as breathing. Do you remember, she asked softly, the first night I spent in your cabin? You gave me your bed and slept in the chair by the fire. I remember. I was terrified of you. I was terrified of everything. I thought you were going to sell me, or worse. I spent the whole night waiting for you to show your true nature. And what did you think when I did not? I thought you were either the kindest man I had ever met or the best liar. Marcus smiled. Which did you decide? Took a few more nights, but eventually I realized you were exactly what you seemed. A good man broken by grief, looking for a reason to go on living. And you gave me that reason. We gave each other that reason. That is what love does. It gives us something to live for beyond ourselves. They sat together in the gathering darkness, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. The children's voices faded as they went inside for dinner. The stars emerged one by one, ancient and unchanging witnesses to all the joys and sorrows of human existence. I want to be buried here, Kaya said suddenly. When the time comes, I want to rest in this valley beside you, where our children and grandchildren can visit. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes. I want that too. But let us not talk about dying. We still have years left, perhaps. But I want you to know, in case anything happens, I want you to know that I have no regrets. Every moment of my life, from the day I stumbled into your stable to this moment right now, has been exactly as it should have been. Even the suffering, even the pain, especially that. The suffering made me strong. The pain taught me what truly mattered. And all of it led me to you. Marcus turned to look at her, at this woman who had been his partner and his lover and his best friend for more than half a century. I love you, Kaya. I love you too, Marcus. The words were simple, but they held the weight of a lifetime. All the battles they had fought, all the victories they had won, all the sacrifices they had made, it all came down to this. Two people who had chosen each other over and over again every single day. That was the true miracle. That was the real happy ending. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love. Not the achievement of perfection, but the acceptance of imperfection. Not the end of the story, but the continuation of it, generation after generation, as long as there were people willing to believe in something better. Marcus Cole closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the valley he loved. The wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft breathing of the woman beside him. This was home. This was peace. This was everything he had ever wanted and more than he had ever dared to hope for. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was perfect.